So briefly introducing KIDA. So KIDA it stands for Korea InterVarsity Debate Association. KIDA was established back in 2006, and we are the representative body of Korean parliamentary debating circuit. So there are several other formats of debate. By what I know, there are SEDA debate or Lincoln Douglas debate, but KIDA only and exclusively is for parliamentary debate and specifically English parliamentary debate. So yeah, we have 14 member societies affiliated with our institution. These are ADS from Seogang University, CUDS from Chungang University, Day and EDIS both from Ewha University, HDS from HUFS, which is the institution that I'm affiliated with right now, HYDS, which is Hanyang University, IDS and KDS from Gyeonggi University, KMADC from Korea Military Academy, KUDC from Korea University, SDS from Seoulbridge, SKEDA from Sungkyunkwan University, SNUDA from Seoul University, YUU from Yonsei University. These 14 societies are the members, like societies that have a full membership. That means that you guys are fully eligible to participate in the institutional tournament that happened in KIDA. By institutional tournament, what I mean by that, I'll explain a bit later on as well. So KIDA Secretariat, just like you guys have your own council or like your president, vice president, like financial director of your own respective like societies or club, KIDA also has independent secretariat. So like again, my name, I'm Youngwoo Park and I'm currently serving as a president. We also have Suhyun Lee from KUDC serving as a vice president with me, Sunghyun Park and Somi Cha from SNUDA and EDIS working as a planning and development. So any like semester schedules and any tournament that are being organized are being handled by these two secretariat members. We have Yeon-soo Kim from HDS as well, from as working as a secretary. So she writes down all the KCM minutes and every like documents that we upload in KIDA Public Forum. We have Cheo Wee from SNUDA working as a treasury for our KIDA Secretariat. So any finance or any budgetary issues are being handled by Cheo. Dongbin Lee working as a public relations and communications, which is in charge of reaching out to different people and organizing with different clubs as well. You have Yewon Jung from KUDC doing the design. So all the aesthetic works that you'll see in KIDA is probably mostly handled by Yewon as well. So what we do is that we first host monthly KIDA Council meeting. So KIDA Council meeting, by that we mean the secretariats as well as the respective club councils all come together and we discuss on important agendas of KIDA, whether that be tournaments, whether that be things that are related to KIDA constitution. This council meeting is actually open access, which means that if you want to see how KCM happens, or if you want to like raise an issue in this meeting, you're free to do so as well. And we record every meetings into a minute, and that is uploaded on KIDA Public Forum as well. So you guys can also like look through the contents that were discussed through this meeting as well. All right. So what the council in general does, so this is different from secretary. Council is comprised of secretary as well as the like presidents and vice presidents and of the respective societies. So we host KIDA sessions. So during the vacation or before major tournaments, there were joint sessions. So usually when you have like, your own club session, usually you mostly have or debate with your own like club members, but in joint sessions, you're able to debate against or with the members of other clubs or other institutions. So that is a very good opportunity for you to interact with other people in this community. We also plan tournament. We receive a bid from the society and hold a vote in KCM. We also subsidize or support organizing committee for like human resources or with regards to financial aspect. Or sometimes the council or KIDA host tournaments ourselves, or there are other events like, KIDA orientation like this one, or open lectures, or KIDA membership training, and etc. We also had like KIDA MT in person before COVID, but unfortunately, I guess after 2020 when the pandemic started, it was very limited for us to meet in person, but I hope that we can see each other face to face in a recent future. All right, so there are two different types of tournaments in KIDA, which is one institutional tournament and second open tournament. So I briefly talked about institutional tournament already. So institutional tournaments are, for instance, rookie tournament that is happening in the first week of April, or KIDA National Championship, shortened as KNC as well. So these tournaments, you are only eligible to participate as a debater if you are a member of the 14 societies that have a full membership. So the list of societies that I named out earlier, debate team must be composed of debaters from the same society. So given that I am a debater from HDS, and if I want to debate an institutional tournament, then I have to team up with other debater from HDS. I cannot like team up with a debater from SNUDA or a debater from KUDC or a debater from any different society. However, when it comes to open tournaments, so oftentimes we have KIDA Open, Korea Debate Open, or Pro-Am. These you have eligible to participate even if you are not a member of KIDA, which necessarily means that pretty much anyone can participate into these tournaments, and you are able to form a cross-institutional teams as well. That means that if you get to know debaters from other societies, then you might want to ask those friends to go to these tournaments and like have fun together. I think for me, debating with debaters from other society or other institution was a very good chance for me to bond with other people that I don't really see face to face that often as well, right? So lastly, I'm just gonna like explain our social media. So we have KIDA Public Forum. So KIDA Public Forum is a Facebook page that is in which like a lot of announcements are being posted. So you can like I think search KIDA Public Forum on Facebook, and then you will see like our page. You can like request for membership. I think it's pretty much open access as well. Or we have Korea InterVarsity Debate Association, like separate account on which we upload exclusively KIDA matters. So for KIDA Public Forum, like other international circuit announcements are also made. So a lot of like debaters from other circuit, like for instance, the Japanese circuit or Chinese circuit debaters are able to make post or announcement of their own tournaments as well. So if you're interested in participating into international tournament, you might want to also follow that KIDA Public Forum page as well. We also have an Instagram account, KIDA Secretariat. This is being managed by the Secretariat, and this is also where a lot of KIDA exclusive issues are being posted, whether that be KIDA events, KIDA tournaments. You will be able to see some, I guess, personal, like semi-personal Instagram stories that we post. We have YouTube that is named Channel KIDA. So you are able to see some of the past debate tournament videos. So if you want to like get to know, like if you want to see like debate videos from like past KNCs or past like KIDA tournaments, on that YouTube, like the actual debating round video that was recorded are uploaded. So you're able to, maybe if you want to like take references, you want to learn debates, then that YouTube channel is where you're able to have those kind of resources available. We also have our email as well. If you have any inquiries or if you have any official issues that you want to raise that you think needs to be discussed, you're very free to send email. You're also able to reach out to me personally or send messages to Instagram and whatnot. We have also like website where we post our KNC Constitution, KIDA Constitution, etc. So these are the social medias that you're able to have access to. Most of these are open access and you're able to take a lot of reference from it. So if you're interested into knowing what KIDA does or what the actual debate tournament looks like a bit more, then you're very welcome to like follow these pages or access to these platforms. Lastly, I just want to show you what KIDA looked like before pandemic. So this was what it used to look like. So on the left side of the like screen, you see Yonsei Underwood Union hosting KIDA National Championship. So this is a domestic tournament that happened within KIDA, and most of those people who you see in the picture are like debaters or judges from KIDA as well. So KIDA used to be very interactive. Unfortunately, after pandemic, that was a bit limited as well, like I said. And on the right-hand side, what you see is KIDA contingents in the World University Debating Championship, WDC, which is the largest debate institutional tournament that happens in the entire world circuit. So the entire debaters from all over the world come and compete and debate with one another. So oftentimes, like you're able to go to like different countries and debate, which is really fun experience as well. However, again, because of pandemic, most of the debate or pretty much all the debate tournaments are happening online on Zoom as well. Like last year, this WDC, the largest tournament was hosted within Korea or within the Korean institution. So that also means that Korea is doing very active participation in not only within like Korea, but also by and large in Northeast Asia or Asia, as well as like the world debating circuit as well. All right. So that is pretty much it for like me just delivering a very one-way information. So we will now move on to the demo debate. So uh, for this demo debate, we have invited debaters from different institutions and different societies, and they will show you a full version of Asian parliamentary debate. So hope that this can give you an insight as to what the Asian parliamentary debating looks like. I'm sure that you already have experienced debate in your own respective societies. But I think this is also a very good chance to see what the experienced debaters or what the debaters from other institutions like debate or how they engage in debating and whatnot. All right, so just to briefly introduce the guest debaters. So first we have Jin Young-seo from HYDS. He is currently serving as a vice president of Hanyang University Debate Society. He open broke in both KIDA Nationals of last year, SNUDA KNC and HDS KNC, and was nominated as a second best rookie speaker in SNUDA KNC, which is the Asian parliamentary format of KIDA Nationals that happened last year. We have Soo-hyun Lee, which again is the vice president of KIDA right now. She has a very astonishing debate achievement. She was the grand finalist of the NEDC, which is Northeast Asian Debating Championship, the largest varsity tournament that happens in the Northeast Asian circuit. And she was also the 6th Open Best Speaker and overall EFL Best Speaker. She was also Fall KNC semifinalist, ABP Octo finalist, etc. She also has served as a chief adjudication panel in several tournaments as well. We also have Seokjin Yoon from HDS, like the same institution as myself. So he was the grand finalist of SNUDA KNC last year, and he was also Open 6th Best Speaker, top 3rd EFL speaker. He was the champion of HUDC and Nagoya Debate Open, as well as EFL champion of Bali United Asian Debating Championship, and also an octo finalist of Asian British Parliamentary. He also served as a chief adjudicator for the last HDS KNC. So chief adjudicator is basically those people who take charge of the entire motion making process of the tournament, as well as like making judge tests and like dealing with all the judging related material in the tournament. Next, on the opposition side, we have Chaeun Won from YUU. She was a Open Grand Finalist of KUDC KNC and Open 10th Best Speaker as well as EFL 3rd Best Speaker. She broke also in SNUDA KNC 2020 NEDC and broke into the Novice League of KIDA Open 2020. She also served as a chief adjudication panel for the January YU monthly this year. She also was the 4th best adjudicator of the IDA Spring KIDA Rookie Tournament last year. Next, for the opposition speaker, we have Jiu Song from SNUDA. He was a grand finalist of the IDS KIDA Rookie Tournament and open broke in SNUDA KNC and HDS KNC. He was also nominated as a 8th best open speaker for HDS KNC. Last but not least, we have Polina from SDS. She was a breaking panelist of KIDA Open 2020 and was a panel judge for Soulbridge NEDC 2020. She open broke in Asian English Olympics and was 10th best novice debater. She also chaired in WDC, the largest debating like varsity tournament that I already told you, and she was tutored in several workshops as well. So that's pretty much it for debaters, and like I am going to be judging this round and I'm going to be delivering the oral adjudication. By doing so, I think that you guys can understand what the like how oral adjudication works and what you guys want to consider when you know, like debating as well, how judges like view the debate and whatnot. All right, so I think we can start. If there are the show debaters here already, I think you guys can turn on your camera to show yourself to the people who are present. Yeah. I think we're missing Chinyoung's there. Yeah, I think we're missing, what are we missing? I think we're missing Chaeyoung, wait. Um, just a second,
China's there, China's here.
okay, sorry. All right, so the motion I'll share the motion just 1 second. All right, so the motion for the open debate is there's an info slide. I think, yeah, Korea referring to growing generation that gives up three things in life: dating, marriage, and having kids. This idea has recently expanded to giving up on home ownership. So I guess some of you guys might have heard of like 삼포 세대 or 삼포족. So basically that's what this means. And the motion for the open house is this house as a young adult in South Korea would actively embrace the lifestyle of 삼포 generation. All right, so before starting the debate, I'll just put this debate like motion in on the chat as well so that you guys can have a look. Also, like we are planning to, if just in order to like incentivize you guys to listen to the debate, you guys can also like kind of adjudicate on your own and decide which team you think uh, will win or you want to give the win to, whether that be government or opposition. You can send it to private chat directly to me after the debate is over. And for those of you who got it right or who got the verdict right or result right as myself, I will be, you know, we will be giving like we will be sending like gifticons to those who got it right as well. So yeah, we do highly encourage you guys to yeah, like listen and maybe take notes and maybe like try to like evaluate the debate on your own as well. Having all that said, I think we can directly move on to the debate. If there's no problem or if there's no question, seeing none, I think we can directly invite the Prime Minister to start the debate. Here.
Young, sorry, just give me a minute. I really need a minute.
Yeah, you can start as soon as possible.
Okay, sorry, I'll
Yeah, before starting your speech, by the way, it would be really great if the debaters are able to indicate how you want to receive the POI. Yeah, just to respect each other's preferences. Yeah, I just received a question. So will debaters of KIDA RT have prep time? To answer this question, yes, you will. The reason why we don't have prep time for this demo debate is because I already gave out the motions to the show debaters so that they can like start the debate right away and like not have a delay of 30 minutes. But in actual debate tournament, the motions are released and then you will have 30 minutes of prep time. Like we don't force debaters to debate right away. Yeah, that would be very intimidating. But yeah, that's that. So yeah, Seokjin, you can start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I feel like I'm being forced to start a debate as soon as I'm ready. But okay, sorry, there was a bit of a technical delay. Okay, here goes. Hi, I'm Seokjin. I am the Prime Minister of this debate. I would like to get POIs verbally if possible. So I would like the opposing teams to raise POIs by unmuting themselves. He, him for personal pronouns should be fine. And please, please, please raise 2 POIs so I can actually have a finish the speech. Great. That being said, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. What exactly is the Korean problem when it comes to dating or when it comes to having a family? I'll lay out a few things I think a lot of us, especially Koreans, would agree with. First of all, we have a significantly conservative society in which there are gender norms that are very prominent. Although there are attempts to try to break it down, it's very likely and significant that people try to limit the possibility of you to be either masculine if you're a man, so you have to work out in the gym 24/7, or sometimes if you're a female, you have to do makeup on, you have to act very feminine and so on. These are things in which significantly limit people's lives because it limits the possibility of them to pursue their own paths to happiness. We think this is only exclusively happening, especially because we have to fit in to become attractive, right? We have to be attractive because we have to become a good, we have to be a good girlfriend or boyfriend to someone. Then we have to become a good husband or a wife, and therefore you have to do things like, for example, you have to get a job, you have to get a proper good-looking job if you're a guy, and if you're a girl, you have to be a good housewife and do good cooking. All these things are significant limitations to our freedom in which they are being curtailed exactly because you have to get a family, you have to date, and we have to have children as a byprocess of this, right? Secondly, what is a problem in Korea is I think it's also significant that we see a very bad economy, especially after the post like IMF crisis or the Asian financial crisis of 1997. We see a lot of instability when it comes to getting jobs. It's very hard for the youth currently to get jobs, especially because there's an over hyperly competitive society in which there are a lot of people trying to get good jobs. It's already hard for us to try to hold on to our jobs, but also in the process of dating, also the process of trying to get a family and our family. I think these are things in which make it very hard for us to get either one of them, right? So what exactly is this debate about, and what is this debate not about, right? The counterfactual or the world in which we envision on team government is a world in which we prefer to get actually a house, right? We prefer to get a house than to date and have children. We prefer to get further on for careers. We prefer to study more or to pursue the things that we like more than to be restricted by factors that are outside of our own control. We say this debate is not about completely getting rid of friends and social groups. That's not the burden of this proof under this debate. And so opposition can't just be like in a compliment and say, look, on government side, you'll be all alone. That's not true. Obviously, we would like to bullet that. Sure, you will be restricting some types of relationships that might be considered as far superior for opposition. We'll disprove that, but we can get things like, for example, we can have friend groups within our workplace exactly because we try more to be socialize within our career, right? We can also, you don't always have to stick to getting friends within like your workplaces. You can all like, because you have Tinder, you have like not Tinder not for sake of like friends with benefits always, but for example, for getting things like making new friends. You also have SNS or other types of media that allow you to socialize and get new people to share your own hobbies and whatnot. These are all the things that you can get exactly because, I mean, in the past, probably speaking, if you're living in a pastoral area in like area where you had like 20 people in your own village, having a family was a good thing because it can ensure you a socializing benefit. Probably speaking, that's not as true in the modern era when we have urbanization, when you have the technology to find people who probably speaking have similar tendencies with you. So I think that burden of proof under government is we need to as long as it can show you why getting these friends are relatively things in which are likely to happen, but also far better off than more intimate relationships. We're willing to take this debate. So that being said, I like to make two main arguments in my speech. First of all, why do we have significant why we think so there's a significant cost of getting into relationships, maintaining relationships, and trying to go out and ending relationships or reaping the benefits of relationships are far more inferior compared to what we can do in a counterfactual. Secondly, I want to talk about how to gain bargaining power and how to fight the pre-existing norm of rigid gender stereotypes, right? So first of all, why I think I already explained a lot, but why do we think that trying to do things like, for example, get into a relationship, or for example, like to get married or have kids, why are these significant things that restrict individual freedom, right? First of all, I think it's very likely that you have to spend a lot of time and effort when it comes to being attractive, right? You have to do things in which probably aren't your all selves. I'm sure most of you here don't really want to work out in a gym and don't want to look attractive because look, that's a lot of time that's being spent for you not only to further your own career, but also for individuals to become happy, right? There are things that I want to do. I just want to lay in my house and eat potato chips I have under my bed and just watch Netflix. But at the same time, this detracts from the ability for me to be attractive, and therefore it makes me much more harder for me to pursue my own happiness in a sense, right? Second of all, it's because it oftentimes restricts you psychologically. You must completely change who you are from inside, but not only that, you will get rejected sometime or later, right? Because it's really hard for you to, in a very competitive world, where you have to also get a job, and at the same time you have to date. So your girlfriend will be like, you don't love me enough these days because you're always working. So they'll probably like dump you for that. And the process of that would be that you probably have to go through immense amounts of sadness and despair. I think the possibility of us, if we give up on these things, is that we can do one thing properly than to muck up both things, right? Trying to get a job or a career, and at the same time trying to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, right? But the second part, and especially if I think for girls here, like you probably like spend like an hour or like 30 minutes trying to do makeup in the morning. That's probably a lot of time that you could spend sleeping, but a bit more, right? I think these are things which just far significantly make individuals more happier because guess what? 30 minutes in the morning is something I think all of us can agree is a significant increase to our own happiness and welfare. But second of all, it's significantly hard for us to maintain these relationships. Before that, POIs. None? Okay, great. So it's hard for us to maintain relationships. Look at the divorce rates we see in status quo. Now, Korea is also being westernized in a sense, like divorce rates are 50%. That means that you really waste all your time and effort trying to get someone because now you have to reset your ability. You're a 40-year-old man or a girl. You have to find time to both date and to also like get and like try to become attractive again, because probably speaking that's a big problem. Second of all, because you have in Korea, what we call shiwold, or you have your in-laws who all constantly will badger you about when you're getting children, when exactly are you going to get like a bigger house, when exactly. So these are things in which you increase exogenous individuals who actually try to restrict your freedom from outside. Not only do you have your own parents in Korea, which is already restrictive enough, now you have your wife, you now have your in-laws, now you have your friends of your in-laws constantly battering you about what to do. I think this means that individuals' freedom to define their own lives becomes significantly harmful. But third of all, the benefits later as well. As I said before, there are alternatives that exist that individuals can socialize with, and therefore I don't think that you always need to have children or your wife or husband to have an enjoyable life. But second of all, because we have stability in our own lives, A, because you have your own money that you can get because you further on your careers, but B, because we already have a welfare system that is ingrained within Korea. Right. That being said, you don't have to worry about, like, for example, like your kids having to always be there to feed you when you're dying and old, or your wife being there to take you to the hospital, because you can always have the government to do so. You have an infrastructure that you can utilize with the money you have much more saved up. But see, it's because the fact that, probably speaking, your spouses or children aren't always the best investment you can make. These are individuals who you can't have significant control over their choices, right? For example, if your husband gets sick because they have a bad life habit, because they constantly drink despite your own plea, that's a bad investment, because you have to spend like money when you have to pay for their hospital bills. Where your children will get bad grades and bad jobs because they just aren't studying properly. At least I have control or the ability to utilize my money at the most fulfilling way, and therefore I think that's a far more better life choice, especially in the context for Korea, where it's like really hard free to survive. For all these reasons, please propose.
All right, thank you, Prime Minister, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Leader of Opposition to start the case for opposition. Hear, hear.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Polina. I will be LO. If you want to ask me something, please do it orally because I'm not really checking the chat, so I'm afraid to lose some UPIs. So thank you. I will start in 3, 2, 1, let's go. I think it's the case that government tried to give us. It's not about relationship by itself. It's more about quite severe case of toxic love, which sometimes happened, but not always. There are a lot of different kinds of people in relationship, and toxic can be not only like romantic relationship, friendship can also be toxic. My relationship with parents is not quite normal, and it's also quite toxic. And toxic relationship is not okay. And there's things that we need to look at it under our case, because any toxic relationship doesn't have a good influence on us. A relationship can be toxic when another partner don't accept you as you are, as we could see from examples from our prime minister, which showed that our girls need only bodybuilder guys who eat healthy, go to gym, and so on. By myself today, I had breakfast with Burger King, and I'm not wearing makeup for 30 minutes. And I feel myself constantly happy, and my boyfriend loves me for this. So relationship is not about any sort of borders. It's not about acting as you not are. The best relationship comes when you act as you are and when you understand what you want. So isn't it a big self-insight which government tried to sell to us? Of course, yes. When person understands what he wants, he can get what he wants. The culture of Sampo doesn't give us this. The culture of Sampo gives us limitations on our personal and human desire to be loved and be prescribed and be understood. It looks like a way to give up from the way of finding what you really want. The government says us, we want to be happy, we want to find a way of happiness, we need time for ourselves. However, the same Sampo culture doesn't give us the full self-insight. By giving up the one of our biggest by giving up the one of our life parts is not giving us the great self-insights that we can get. We are getting self-insights from communication with people. Communication with different sorts of people is the biggest psychological tool to understand ourselves. The human relationship is really complicated, and here I will agree with government. However, why romantic relationships are different from friendships and family? Mostly, you don't choose your friends and family, because mostly it's people from your cycle where you came for some reason. You're born with your parents, you can't really change them. Mostly you make friends in your working environment. So again, you can't really choose your colleagues. You just come to the office and you see them. However, your romantic partner is one that you're choosing. And it's a really nice thing because mostly your relationship with this person are long-term. So it has development and you go through different stages by realizing better yourself and your partner. If you're giving up dating at all and don't date, it's great if you really want it. However, Sampo culture doesn't give us the way to choose. It gives us only one way: don't date. And it's not a nice way to solve the problem of not finding a nice partner. But because when you don't look for a partner, when you don't like date at all, you don't have any chance to find the person who will make you the happiest you have ever been. And of course, we understand that you can be happy by yourself. However, you can be happy by yourself only when you realize your own needs. However, Sampo culture doesn't give you that chance to realize what you really want and what you really need. Because when you block your desires, for example, you want to have a relationship, but you decide to go with Sampo culture and you believe that it's nice for you and you want to find more from yourself. And you're blocking actually one of your wishes and you're not looking at yourself in this paradigm. You just go with the flow, follow the media and follow other people. But again, it doesn't at the end of the day gives you the biggest happiness, which is government was proposing for. So it doesn't work that way that government described, as you could see from my examples. Our team believes that a human choice is the biggest thing that makes us happy. The way when we can choose something, when we can understand what we need, it's the best way to make us happy. But Sampo culture doesn't give us this. To start this argument, I want to look at the Sampo culture history a bit, how it actually come up. Sampo culture was appeared in the Korean media in early 2010s, when the Korean life was much worse than now. Korean people weren't the same wealthy as now, and this culture for people seemed like an escape of the problems that they can see. However, it didn't give the happiness away, and it didn't make people happier, because now we can see that Korea is quite depressed country with big suicide rates and with big depression rates, which is not good for country, because happy people can make country happy. But here we can see that even economy of Korea became greater, Korean people didn't become happier. So here we can see that Sampo culture doesn't make people happy. But why it doesn't make people happier? Because, as I already said, human choice is a nice thing to have, and people must make choices even they are wrong for them, because they can get biggest self insight from this. And as we can see, that some culture didn't affect happiness, but why relationship potentially and human choices can make this change and make Korean people a bit happier? Because relationship partner can support you. Even on work, after coming from long day, family supporting you. I don't know families which won't support you, and majority of people actions are done for their family and for their children, as it was done. People want to work harder, and children are the biggest motivation for their parents. It's also like a well-known thing, and the happiness that we get from actually from love, it's the happiness that we can get from love and our loved ones is also giving us a big motivation to work, to look at ourselves and be dedicated. The support, happiness, and greater motivation is three things that we are getting from good and normal relationship, which are not toxic at all. When other person support us, can lay down and watch TV with us for the whole evening, it's great, because we also want to watch TV with these people. And good romantic relationship are built only when person know what he wants. And to know what you want, you need to discover yourself instead of following different social movements. Because when you follow such social movements as Sampo, you don't understand what you want, because you're just following the way other people follow, and it's not the things that makes you happier. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case. Here.
Hi, am I audible? Okay, I'm the Deputy Prime Minister for this today. I prefer PYs through chat. I have no preferred gender pronouns. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. You had to ask people of the previous generation what happiness looked like. Most of them might say it comes from family, it comes from my partner. It comes from having these ideal situations where you can actually create your family with a big house, with a green lawn, etc. If you ask people of this generation what happiness looks like to them, they might say it looks like being able to have my own personal space. It looks like being able to perceive or pursue the values that I find valuable to me. And we think that there's a generational shift of these, because the very things that were considered basic, that were considered necessary in the previous generation, are not being guaranteed today. Housing is not a guarantee today. Being able to pursue personal values, or being able to get a job that you really want, or being able to have a job at all, is not a thing that is guaranteed at all. Therefore, we say if these basic things that are so guaranteed in the previous generation are not today, then you have to have a shift in public perception of what you have to actually give up. And we say that rather than giving up your individual self, rather than giving up your individual happiness, we would gladly give up three things, which are, we say, are dating, marriage, and having children. Because we say that these three things, while they may give you happiness to certain individuals, they are not your individual happiness, meaning that they cannot guarantee that you will be happy. That is an individual happiness. Marriage does not guarantee you happiness in the way that you focusing on yourself does. Having a child does not mean that you will necessarily become so much happier. It is not a guarantee. And we say that in an age of lack of guarantees, where nothing is being given to you, we say that it is time to focus on yourself. Before I begin any further, I'd like to first rebut things the Leader of Opposition brought up in today's debate. They told us how basically you don't choose your friends and family, but you choose your partner. Therefore, you don't have to give up your partner. We say in a modern society, it's easier to find a genuine friend than a partner. If you really can't find a genuine friend, we say that the realistic chances that you find a genuine partner are much, much less, right? If you can't find a friend that you believe that you can share hobby with, or you can, you can talk about with anything, or you can basically find a fulfilling relationship, the chances that you're going to find a genuine partner that you can do the same things are much, much less, especially in today's society, where the standard for finding a partner is so low, where women are looking for people basically that won't kill them, that won't kill their partners in a heated argument, where people have these basic minimum standards of basically trying to find someone that is a psychopath. We say that it's much more easier to find a fulfilling relationship within your friends and families. And therefore, the notion that you can actually choose your partner, we say, isn't really a choice to begin with. We say that's more of the social narrative that exists. So before I go, so the two arguments that I have today, one is basically to expand upon what the Prime Minister told you. Basically, by giving up these values, we believe that millennial age basically earns two valuable things. One, to gain personal choice, which is political bargaining, which can be used as a political bargaining tool to make sure that the basic essential tools that we need or guaranteed in our society are guaranteed through law or are guaranteed financially by political pressure. Secondly, we believe it gives liberation, more specifically to females to the female counterpart in Korean society. So why is this true? Basically, as we told you from the beginning, the Korean society already exists in a very significantly conservative way, meaning that basically there are gender norms that are extremely prominent and that you have to marry, you have to have children, you have to have, these things to be guaranteed, especially in an age where birth rates are declining. The political counterpart of this is not wondering about why people are not married. It's about why are people not having a child. It's about forcing people to have a child, right? Say that there isn't enough discussion or positive discussion politically on this point about why people are not having a child or why people can't do this. It's because of basically these other basic things that should be guaranteed aren't. Therefore, we say by actively giving up these three things as a whole, what we do is you gain political pressure and we basically change the discussion as a whole about why people are giving these up. Therefore, and we believe that's the start of actually gaining these things through law. Before I begin any further, I'll take you on.
So you said that basically marriage as well as dating and those kind of acts do not guarantee happiness. However, under the same logic, personal development also does not 100% guarantee happiness. So at the end of the day, your exclusive benefits are not as exclusive as you paint in your main argument. So what's the positive impact that your side has?
So we say that nothing has 100% guarantee of happiness, but you're more likely, actually very likely, to find happiness when you focus on when you focus on yourself, on your individual self. That has a much more highly likely potential of happiness than focusing on marriage or dating. Because the problem with dating, marriage, and children is that you're basically setting your own expectations of happiness on someone else who has their own individual life. And we believe that that is not always a guarantee. For example, if you set your expectation of happiness on your family or on your child, that means that you're basically setting expectations on your child that the child may not be able to achieve. For example, many parents set their expectations of happiness on their child, right? They want their child to basically get a gold medal in piano or basically get a gold medal in, academics, etc. And that is where the happiness comes from. When the child cannot achieve that, that is when basically a parent loses their happiness because the child cannot achieve what they should have or what they should have done. Especially in Korean society, this is highly, highly concentrated upon the child. And we believe that basically these expectations of happiness are not realistic. Rather, you should focus on yourself. That is a much more happier, and that's a much more healthier way of guaranteeing happiness. And it's much more likely under our side too. Why? Because basically, if you focus on yourself, these are things that you can significantly guarantee to a certain extent. For example, focusing on your public career, focusing on your career as a whole, this guarantees that basically you can choose what you want, or the actions that you may not have, the actions that you choose. Basically, you take the consequences upon yourself. So even if you fail on a certain way, you can actually get up by yourself and you can say that, oh, I can do this better in this way, or I can actually, choose to do things differently. However, we say that cannot happen when you choose to basically focus your happiness on somebody else. Moving on to the basically part of the political bargaining, say that basically there's a lack of policies that focus on millennials, especially housing, etc., that have made significant progress. We say when people give up, millennials age as a collective change the social narrative, which can only happen when you give up these three values or these three burdens as a whole. What happens is that basically political pressure begins to build on, and then we can actually have real change within our society where housing is not just for people who already have capital, but basically you can actually guarantee more individual freedom. We can actually basically guarantee more individual happiness through policies, etc., and basically gain stability. And we say that once you have stability, these values can be regained. But as of now, your social narrative do not value these individual happiness or individual stability. We say that by giving up these three burdens, basically we create political pressure enough upon yourself. Moving on to the second part about why this is so much better, especially for the female counterpart within our Korean society. think the biggest misconception that opposition has is that, these things are somewhat separable, that you can have a child without dating or marriage, or you can just, choose to date and have a partner, actually think about marriage and having a child, right? That you're insulated by choosing one of these burdens. We say no. These three burdens more often than not will likely come in a package in our current society, right? Because what happens is that when you selectively choose these values, you're opening yourself up to criticism of the other two. What do these criticisms look like, right? These values are so strongly connected that basically, if you're just dating, I'm usually open target in every family meeting for when the marriage is going to happen. When grandma can finally post pictures of her own grandmother on Facebook, like every other grandmother. I mean, the society pressures you on all three of these persons, and these only get worse exponentially. Therefore, we say that you have to give up all three of these burdens, and we say that when you do that, you can guarantee more potential happiness on your side, and that is when society actually begins to change. And for all these reasons, we're very proud to propose. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue up case here.
Okay, this 7:30 speech, right? Speech length should be 7:30, right? Like 7:30 max.
It's 7:15 max, and I wasn't writing down anything from 7:15. And I wanted to remind debaters if they were not timing themselves after 7:30. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm Jiu Song from SNUDA, and I prefer he or him. You can POI me verbally or chat. I really don't care. And yeah, what did I miss? Yeah, I'm clearly audible because I just had a talk with Young Park. Okay. So the previous speaker came up and said that marriage doesn't guarantee happiness. And at that point, I was writing down some things, so I forgot the POI. But my Jayun one, my wonderful teammate, POI, it's the exact same thing that I was thinking in my mind, that nothing guarantees happiness, which is pretty much true, right? And then there came a ridiculous response saying that nothing guarantees happiness, yeah, but it's much better to focus on yourself, right? I have 5 responses. Number 1, this is not focusing on yourself, right, Mr. Speaker? Because this is an extremely unconstructive narrative to begin with. It's not like like double income, no kids, where you and your partner decide not to have kids because you want to dedicate the money that you and your partner earn to yourself, to fully to yourselves, right? This is not a narrative like that. On the other hand, what the narrative government side is promoting is an extremely cynical narrative where you say that you want to take away a big chunk of incentive that would have driven you towards becoming a better person, right? You no longer want to have kids, you no longer want to be married, or you no longer want to be in a relationship, which is simply giving up these 3 aspects instead of trying to develop that sort of discussion towards towards becoming a better person. You're simply blocking all those potential possibility and potential success in the future. So therefore, even if it's true, it's a very unconstructive narrative to begin with. But second of all, we think this is not true to begin with, because as it's already psychologically proven throughout history, the more you're socially intertwined, the less likelihood that you're going to have a health disease. There's going to be a less likelihood that you're going to have heart diseases and whatnot. So we think that by simply excluding all these factors for your romantic partners, that doesn't necessarily going to make you live a healthy life. If living a healthy life is sort of equivalent to living a happy life and whatnot. But third of all, we think that narrative is extremely harmful, and it's very cynical in a way that it only increases afraidness and laziness, and it blocks you from having the potential success. So why is that? Number 1, the reason why you're saying that you want to give up is because you're very afraid and that you know that you're going to fail in the future, right? But the fact is, if you're afraid of failing in the future, then you're not going to get anywhere near success, right? The same kind of logic is applied when, for example, when you're learning how to ride a bike, you're eventually going to fall down at some point, right? So falling down when you're trying to ride a bike is also a process of you learning how to ride a bike. You can't learn how to ride a bike without falling down from it, right? This is the same thing. If you're afraid to fail and therefore you're going to accept that narrative, you're not even going to try to earn money that can afford you and your partner to have a kid in the future and whatnot, you're not going to fail, but you're not going to have the success that is derivable through that. So you're not going to earn anything from being afraid, right? Yeah. And every rich people have failed before in their lives. Yet some poor people have not failed before because they were too afraid to try and whatnot. But also, you're going to become lazy. Why? Because the fact that you want to have kids in the future and you want to be married means that you no longer need that you need to have the financial capacity to not only feed yourself but also your kids in the future. So you're going to have to try extra harder than expected. If you give up these things, then it means that you don't have to try as much hard, right? Yeah, because you only have to feed yourself in the future. So that's going to drive you to become lazier if you say that you're going to give up and if you say that you're so cynical about this situation. But third of all, you're going to miss all the potential success that can be derivable through not giving up these things. Like, let's say that you want to buy a house, right? You want to buy a house, and in the process, you may or may not be successful in buying a house. But in the process, you're at least going to learn, like, for example, some real estate regulations or how I can invest my money to be able to afford a house in the future. So in a numerical scale, if your end goal is to reach the numerical scale out of 1 to 10, if your end goal is to reach 10, maybe you cannot reach the goal 10 in the future, but eventually you're going to reach somewhere near that point, right? 9 or 8. But if you don't have any goal, and if you're simply going to give up, that's not going to reach you anywhere near that end goal 10. So we think it's extremely harmful and cynical narrative for government to promote that idea. Yeah, and what else did it come out from the government bench? The government bench also said that there's economic instability. No, thank you. Economic instability, and that there's economic recession, and therefore it's extremely hard for people to have birth rate, and that's the reason why birth rate is extremely low. Two responses. Firstly, that's not true, Mr. Speaker, because economic recessions actually happened various times in the past. For example, an IMF or oil shock and whatnot. According to their side, if economic recession was the decisive factor of people having low birth rate, then each and every time that economic recession happened, there should have been lower, like, decrease in birth rate. But that's not the case, right? Which means that there are other factors of like that in birth rate. But second of all, I also want to talk about this. Like, there are things that are within the boundary of our control, and there are things that you cannot control, like structural problems, like, for example, like soaring house prices or low wages. These are sort of the structural things that are not out of your control. So the appropriate question here is to ask what is within the boundary of my control, right? So I think instead of being cynical about the situation, and instead of asking why do I not have the appropriate time and resource to spend to dedicate to me and my partner, I think the better question and the better narrative under our side would be, how can I spare the appropriate time and resource to dedicate to me and my partner, right? What government bench is doing is basically taking away that huge chunk of incentive and huge chunk of question in this case. But furthermore, they also said that socializing is possible by saying that friends and family are still existing. So for two responses. Firstly, that's not mutually exclusive, which means that all the benefits that their side have said are still derivable under our side. But second of all, we already told you that that having friends is like probably that is voluntary, but that's not as like intimate. But and plus having family, for example, you don't get to choose who your parents are, right? You don't get to choose who your brothers and sisters are, which means that they're not voluntary, yet they're very closely intertwined. But what romantic partner and romantic relationship gives you is these two benefits meshed up together, right? You can voluntarily choose your partner, plus they're extremely closely intertwined, which means that this is the very exclusive benefit that you can derive through only under our policy. But furthermore, there's also a very ridiculous statement coming that time and effort in trying to look attractive. I think Seokjin said this, but time and effort in trying to look attractive is extremely wasteful under current society. But two responses. Firstly, I think that's a very narrow way of looking at how people like choose their partners, right? According to like various like marriage making like websites and applications in Korea, the first priority like standard from women, like over 40%, I think, was not attractiveness or appearance, but it was rather financial capacity and like whether that person's job was socially honored and socially privileged or whatnot, which means that it's attractiveness is not something that's like the decisive factor. But second of all, even if you were to say that looking attractive is wasteful, it's clearly human instinct to look at like somebody's appearance, and then you make an assessment out of it, right? I'm pretty sure that even if you guys are not saying it out loud, you guys are looking at my face and making sort of assessment of this person's looking at that way. That's also the reasons to why when you go to interviews or when you go to like job interviews, you want to look nice, right? Because that's a human instinct to look at somebody's appearance and you want to look good in front of those people, right? So to give you a counter like comparative, on the government side, they have absolutely no goal. They're giving up these things. They're being cynical, and they're not even trying. They're removing a big chunk of incentive that would have driven you towards becoming a better person. But under our side, we actually promote people to drive them forward. And we may or may not succeed, but at least our side gives chance to be successful in the future. Therefore, more than proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Government Whip to start her speech. Here, here.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So, getting my timer. Well, still getting my timer. Okay, starting my speech in 3. So as the government whip, I'm going to talk about mainly 3 clashes in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about self-development and which side gets that better under like which either side. And secondly, I'm going to talk about this idea of failure because I think it was very interesting coming from Chu talking about failure, right? Thirdly, I'm going to talk about like political change, which they never engaged, by the way, and prove to you why this is the most important thing in today's space. So firstly, about happiness and like relationships, right? The first thing I want to do is simply compare this like friend versus partner thing, because I think although this wasn't the main clash in this debate, the opposition team seems to make it so because they want to argue that relationships or romantic relationships with your family is much more valuable than friends, and so on and so forth. So the first thing I want to note here before moving on to anything is to point out that this is simply exclusive to our side, right? Because firstly, when you opt into a romantic relationship, you normally do not have enough time to spend with your friends. You normally do not have the time to like go out with your friends as much or expand your social circle in order to find a partner that you want to find, right? But secondly, and more importantly, I would say that if you are married and if you're devoted to your children and your family, you obviously do not have like the physical time to meet friends, like have a drink with them or have friends or benefits or whatnot. We think that there is a clear trade-off between the two, and we think that there is an exclusive benefit to our side of the bench. But then the second thing I want to compare is this like analysis between friends and partners, right? Because their side was really uncharitable when they say that, oh, you can still have friends and like your partner is much better. Firstly, I think that the comparative here is not you having a partner and having a friend, but you not like trying to have a partner and having a friend, right? Because like in the status quo, obviously, when you can find your friends in various social circles and find friends who you like can like coincide with, or friends who you can interact with quite easily in your social circle or social group, you have to spend a lot of time and money in order to find a partner who suits you or is a perfect fit for you. But even then, you would have all of these consequences. You break up, you like feel sad, you feel depressed, you say you will never opt into a relationship again. I think that this is the realistic comparative in this space. But secondly, I think that even on this comparative, it's much better for you to actually have friends. Why is this? Because this is because of 2 reasons. One, I think that you have much more autonomy when it comes to choosing your friends rather than choosing a partner. Why is this? Because normally when you choose a friend, there is much more like room for you to opt out when you don't like that friend, or you don't like to hang out with that friend, and you can have a lot of friends at the same time. So that means that you can interact with this friend if you're feeling like lonely. You can interact with this friend if you want to find a person who's really funny, and so on and so forth. But on the comparative, when you have this one single partner or one single family that you are bonded with, you do not have much autonomy to actually opt out. You do not have much autonomy to have like a lot of partners at the same time, because that's like sort of weird, right? But then the second thing I want to talk about here is that there are many aspects of your families or partners that you cannot choose, or you do not have the autonomy to choose, right? For example, you can't choose who your partner's parents will be like your in-laws will be like after you marry. You can't choose how your children will be like, because it's like a random thing, right? You can't choose the genetic like corporations of your children. I would say that there are so many things that are unexpected. If we can't compare the exact amount of happiness that comes from your family or your partner, I would say we would choose the side that has more autonomy. But then I think that there are like many aspects of your friend that makes it better than a partner. Like obviously you can choose who you can like be friends with, and there you can like have more self-development and whatnot. But then, yeah, with that having been said, I think that like the trade-off is quite clear in this aspect. Yeah. But then the second question I want to answer in this debate is what you said about how like, oh, you're not going to try hard, you're going to be lazy and stuff like that, right? The first thing I want to talk about here is in no terms does the sampo narrative say that you're going to give up anything and like lie in your bed for your entire life, right? Because obviously you are giving up being married and you're giving up like having children, you're giving up having a partner, you're giving that up for a reason, right? And I would say that the current generation usually gives that up for having a good career or having your own happiness, like YOLO, you do the things that you want, not bounded to a certain area. That is why the narrative is gaining so much popularity in the status quo. Like when you don't want to like have a partner, you can just like go out and meet different people. If you don't want to have a family, you can use that money to go on like vacation to a like very rich country, or you can like enjoy your vacation at a beach spending that money, right? I would say that usually there are many aspects that you do trade off, the point of which you like think that you're going to give up all of these things. I don't think that this narrative is only cynical in and of itself. I think that it provides better choices. But then the second thing I want to talk about here is this idea, this weird idea about being lazy, right? Because I would say, why does like having kids and family or like your partner be the only incentive for people to actually try hard, right? Because I think that this is absolutely ridiculous. Because even me, I don't have a boyfriend, but I don't go to like work or like I don't debate because I want to get a nice boyfriend, right? I think there are so many incentives in the status quo that make people work hard. For example, you might want to have a higher position in your career. You might want to have like more money to go on a nice vacation. You might want to be like really good at your work so you can go to a better position. I think that all of these things are incentives for people who to actually try to work hard. I don't think like having a nice family is a good incentive for most of the people who lives in the society, right? But then the second thing, and I'm going to be really charitable here, it's because I'm giving the even if case, right? Even if you say that you, for some reason, you have less motivation under our side of the bench, I would say that that's still much better, because that incentive, even if you're less incentivized and you like earn less money or you're slightly less successful or whatever, you can at least like use the earnings that you learn in your work like wholly for yourself, rather than sacrificing all of those things for your family and your partner, right? Because like think about it like realistically, when you have a family that you need to feed, all of your money that comes from your work is going to go to your partner or your child. All of your money that is going to go to your partner, like doing a relationship, like you might want to buy him like a present to make that person happy or whatnot. I would say that you don't have to, like, you can decrease all of those unnecessary spendings under our side of the house. You can use it solely on your happiness under our side of the house. For example, you can go on a vacation. I want to go on a vacation, right? But then I want to do some weighing here, because I think if you like compare, if both sides give you happiness, I would say it's logical to choose the side that has the like lesser possibility of failure, because I think the consequences of failure are too big under their side of the house. If you fail to find a partner, if you fail to have a family, although you want to have a family, if you divorce because you don't like your family, you're going to be significantly unhappy under their side of the bench. Because like you wanted to talk about, oh, how people are happy, they try hard, they succeed. Not every person tries hard and succeeds, right? I failed to go to SNU, although I tried hard and succeed. I would say that all of these consequences of failure are so large that like the point at which you do fail, the consequences are going to be much bigger. If that is the case, I would prefer that you just should go with the easy option that can guarantee like solid and concrete happiness for the rest of your life. We're more than proud to propose.
All right, thank you. Sorry, thank you, Government Whip, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Opposition Whip. Here.
Okay, I like my POIs orally and she, her, and if I'm audible, I think my speech can begin in 3, 2, 1. I think starting from the reason why I think a government side has such like a cherry pick definition of what tempo generation and that narrative entails is because the prime minister didn't really define the context properly enough, right? They just went off on a government fiat and it relied simply on the info side to kind of narrow the scope of this debate to interpersonal relationships, and mainly regarding dating and as well as like having a family and pertaining to the general narrative of like the white picket fence narrative. But then actually, if you look at the context in which this narrative has impacted South Korean society and especially the youth generation over the past 10 years, it has clearly seen that ever since the media has highlighted the terrible aspect as well as the nihilistic aspect of people having to give up highly essential as pristine values, what happened is youth depression rates have skyrocketed. It's been on a record high ever since, not to mention youth suicide rates have also been on a record high between the MC generation. So it kind of sees that this narrative has never really truly liberated the South Korean youth community society ever since it has taken mainstream over the past 10 years. If this narrative was truly constructive as well as like liberating as like government is trying to cherry pick and paint, then why is the youth generation not content? Why are they still depressed, and why are they still stuck in this rut where everybody's pretty nihilistic and pessimistic regarding the future? We believe that's because this narrative initially entails, the very wording of the narrative entails give up culture, right? It says pookie in some it is pookie, right? Giving up basically means that you're foregoing a value that seems desirable. And under this very framework itself, it's kind of shown that having an interpersonal relationship, a close interpersonal relationship, whether that be on a romantic basis or forming a family, it is integral or essential to people gaining happiness. Not to mention aiming for higher or more challenging goals such as buying houses, right? So the main thing regarding their narrative regarding slide Govlib basically gives three things, like versus between partners and friends, as well as like give up culture, laziness, as well as pertain to success. But I would like to say that the chances regarding success is always against the odds, right? The reason why we think success is such a hard thing is regardless of whether or not, when you're trying for something, the chances of succeeding rather than failure is always much slimmer, right? So there are counterfactual they draw, which is like career success, self-development. But if you think at the sheer number of like, let's say banking partners versus which would be like kind of our definition of career success, right? Versus being married, which are actually the odds are less in their favor if you kind of look at it. They're trying to say that if you invest all this time in personal success, the trade-off that you're going to get is like personal success, right? But they never really give a clear definition of what personal success is going to look like. And in Korea's current standard, and as we see that the job market is very unstable, and there's not been constructive government funding as well as infrastructural help to help the youth generation move to a different higher aspiring goal, if it's not interpersonal success, right? That chances are also slim on their side. So even their best case scenario and the net harms identified in their best case scenario is still present. So I'm going to give out the three clashes that should be the main focus of today's debate. One, regarding relationships and loneliness. Two, regarding happiness and success. And three, are under what net harm and the world comparison, right? So regarding with relationships and success, under both worlds, friends are possible. Under both worlds, people who want to date are going to date, right? We're talking about the small group of people who are on the fence regarding whether or not should they be in a more closely interpersonal relationship and a romantic relationship. Under their narrative, they're actually forcing people to give up dating because the society, the structure is not going to help you. You're not fit for dating. That's a kind of nihilistic narrative that they're actually pouring down on people who are actually on the fence of deciding whether or not they should date, right? In comparison, and under our world, we're actually giving them the liberty to choose, right? If you and actually take a moment and think about it, and whether or not they want to opt into dating, which is actually so at least under our side for the stakeholders, we're giving them the freedom and liberty to actually consider a choice where their narrative forces them to give dating and actually cross it out from the get-go. Not to mention the short-term, long-term trade-off as well as the irreversibility. So I think both houses contend that we are social animals and we need interpersonal relationships. That's why side government keeps saying that friendships are enough to cover your interpersonal relationship. But one, how much can you like kind of expand the capacity of your social circle, right? Just because you're dating doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get like 100 friends, right? The maximum probably like interpersonal circle that you can manage is 15 to 45 people. That's kind of the maximum capacity according to statistics. So like their benefits are not going to be that positive. Not to mention this youth generation is probably going to grow up and going to be old, and they're also going to grow old in the long term, right? So people who actually have a family versus people who are relied on their friends throughout the years, do you really think the grandparents, like how many relationships do you think you can sustain in the long term? So regarding loneliness, if we're both working up the world where we are saying that on the premise that people need interpersonal relationships to find happiness or fulfillment to a certain degree, then our side actually guarantees people to at least have a shot or think about maintaining long-term relationships, despite that being time consuming or that being like a trade-off with your or spending time with your buddies, right? Secondarily, regarding happiness and success, regarding self-fulfillment. So we believe that the process of challenging yourself to aspire to a higher goal, that process itself, the incremental successes that you feel while you're moving yourself to a higher goal and trying to achieve that is actually where people find self-fulfillment and where people find self-development, the very process of which. So even if you're not successful at dating at your first goal, or even if you're not successful at buying like a house with a hangang view at your first goal, if you worked while in the process of working towards that goal and try to manifest the goal, self-development is actually better fulfilled under our world when people have a positive aspect and try to look and try to succeed in the odds rather than internalizing the give up narrative the side government is proposing. So regarding self-fulfillment as well as happiness, our side clearly has a better incentive mechanism for the
Sure.
individual to go beyond that. Yes?
Yeah, you said this narrative was restrictive. At the same time, notice that this came as a reactionary response to a society that already forces you to follow the dominant narrative of date, marry, and have kids. Therefore, we already told you in DPM that this shows an alternative possibility, and I think that's the reason why we are less restrictive and more liberating.
However, even if that's the case, as our deputy has also mentioned, regarding moving on to our third point about net harm in the world, like which one is much more constructive in the sense that people are much more aware of the social, like for instance, if you look at the housing market as well as real estate, if people are actually thinking that there could be homeowners in the future, they'll take more interest in trying to change government and as well as government policies and regulations. They'll be more interested and they'll be better educated in the subject because they at least look towards a goal in the future, right? So in that sense, actual constructive and policy changes also happen better under our world because at the end, that people still believe that they will be able to have those kind of, or will be able to have internalize those values in the future, while as that government's narrative just cuts them and gatekeeps them from even aspiring to those goals and saying that, oh, you could just pour in more time on yourself. And that's actually burden pushing on the individual and saying that all of your personal happiness needs to come if you better develop yourself. So that's actually more restrictive under your world. And that is the exact reason why a youth generation under our side should not internalize this harmful narrative, and that more than proud to oppose.
All right, thank you, Opposition Whip, for that fine speech. I would like to welcome Opposition Reply to close the opposition's case. Here.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm kind of surprised because like Taeyun literally said everything I was thinking on my mind. So yeah, I'm gonna think about some new things in my speech. So firstly, Suyeon spent like 3 minutes of her speech saying that friends are much better than having a romantic partner, because if you have a romantic partner, you're gonna dedicate all your life there, and therefore you're not gonna have any autonomy. And if you have friends, you can have more autonomy, you can be more independent, right? I totally agree with you. The difference between government bench and opposition bench, the decisive difference, ladies and gentlemen, is that under their side, you don't have a choice. You may like to be friends, you may like to have friends, you may like to have romantic partners, but the thing is, you're gonna give up. It means that you're sufficiently blocking every sort of potential possibility or every sort of potential benefit that is derivable through having a romantic partner, right? That's the difference between theirs and our side. That's a coercive choice, right? It's not a lifestyle. It's excluding the sort of like choices that you have. But under our side, you may like to have friends, then you can have friends. Or you may want to be in a romantic relationship, you may want to dedicate all your life to a single partner, then you might as well do that. You might as well give it a shot because you're not giving up under our side. You're not cynical about a situation. You're actually analyzing the situation. You're trying to think about how to spare time, appropriate time and resources to spend to have a romantic partner, right? And second of all, this point actually came out, I think, in deputy, but I didn't deal with this because I thought that already preemptively, LO, Paulina already responded to this preemptively, but let me do it again because I think it's not clear. Secondly, the government bench said that there has been a generational shift. So like the basic idea is that you don't have to follow the traditional stages of life anymore. Therefore, you can still live happily ever after without having a romantic partner, with only focusing on yourself, right? Like two responses. Like firstly, that's not true to begin with, because like over 70% of 30s in South Korea are married right now. So even if you were to argue that that is the mainstream, that's actually not the mainstream. So if you say that I'm not going to get married because the tradition is shifting, you might as well not get comforted by the exact same thing, because you're going to discover at some point that everybody or almost everybody near you has already been married. So even if you're trying to argue that the mainstream has changed, that traditional shift has not happened to begin with, which is our yeah. And second of all, this is also the response to the POI that Seokjin gave in our whip speaker speech about saying that what was that? Oh yeah, that this sample generation, this wording came out as a reaction to people's hard lives, right? But second of all, we should actually think about how this narrative is being reproduced, right? Like we told you before in our LO speech, the reason why this wording came out actually in 경향신문 in like 2011, over a decade ago, right? At that point, the reason why this came out was because people's lives were actually like people's lives were really hard and difficult times and whatnot. And then right now things have changed, right? The thing is, nowadays the reason why sample generation is like now it's the other way around. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not that people are living hard and therefore people in news media are using this wording. It's the other way around. It's now the news media is reproducing this idea of sampo generation, that you have to give up, that it's extremely hard to have kids, extremely hard to marry. And then people realize that, oh, maybe people around me are extremely having a hard time. Therefore, maybe it's about time that I have to give up right now. So if this is the case, then it's extremely problematic, because now you're not regarding rationally thinking about the reasons to give up, but you're rather like you're in a vicious cycle to like give up, right? Because the media has keep on highlighting the negative aspects of having kids and the difficult things, and therefore we think this is problematic and that this vicious cycle should stop. But furthermore, I think it's near my end of the speech, so let me end my speech by giving you a friendly example. The previous Suyana came up and said the price of failure is too big, but we think that let me give you a friendly example. You know, Harlan Sanders. I read this guy in like a newspaper like 2 years ago. This guy is a grandfather who, at the age of 65, were broke, financially broke, and then he went toured his whole country having his chicken recipe and got rejected 1,010 times, right? That's clear failure, right? But at his 1,011th time, he got successful in selling his recipe. And that Harlan Sanders is the grandfather in KFC. So that's like that's why even if you're afraid to fail, that's why you have to try. So I'm more than proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, opposition reply, for that speech. I would like to welcome government reply to close this debate. Here.
Just a second, please. I need to get my. All right, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the opposition clearly takes the debate home. If we were living in a vacuum society, where society did not affect individuals, but individuals affect the society, the individual has so much individual power that they could be able to decide what is happiness and what not, that they will be able to be insulated from all these societal pressure. That is when opposition can fully, be persuasive in their arguments, that individuals can actually pursue their own definition of freedom, that these all things can happen. The problem is that we all know we do not live in a vacuum society. We live in a society that constantly pressures individuals every day throughout small processes. Every day is a chipping process. And we told you clearly from the beginning why these three burdens specifically take away so much from an individual, that they take away what is you, that they take away the definition of what should be happiness, and basically you're forced to give them up. They told you from the beginning, they told you from the DPM, they told you from the WIP, that basically, why should we give these up? Why would we give up these happinesses when everybody knows that you can be happy from dating a person, when everybody knows that you can have a child and be somewhat happy? If society wasn't positioned like this, if society was a vacuum, nobody would give these values up, right? We clearly told you from the beginning that shouldn't we keep the society. And the Korean society that exists today is not one that is opening, it's not one that is welcoming towards new children. House prices for the past 5 years have climbed by over 100%, especially in Seoul, and birth rate has declined by more than 50%. These are corresponding values, right? Nothing just happens out of nowhere. We believe that society at this point specifically has come to this point because of society, the way that it's positioned right now, and to change that is to give up these values. And we told you two clear mechanisms why that happens, right? Change happens when you actually focus on your individual well-being, when you actually try not to stop, go with the media and go with the flow and actually get a partner, or be pressured into that societal narrative that you need to have a partner to be happy, when you actually focus on what your career can do for you, when you focus on what you actually want, what you can actually do in your free time, or what kind of friends you want. That's when happiness can also happen and is more likely to happen in our change back once again, right? So the position whereas Ji Song told you about, in the past 60 years, like Colonel Sanders, when people can live off one dream, and basically change can happen in our society. Everybody wants to achieve that society. We happen when young people give up these three burdens and gain political power, where you actually focus on your individual self and try to realize happiness from somewhere else, not by having kids in an environment where housing costs has tripled every year, or not by in an environment where basically you have to think about education costs every year. The average cost to take a child to college is about $150,000. And when we say that these are not achievable goals for the millennial, we say there's a huge difference in between not giving up and setting up a goal that is clearly not achievable. And we say that at some point you have to be able to give these values up. And we believe that as a millennial living in a society where you have full recognition of what is happening around you, when you actually realize that what success looks like, we feel like that is the time when you say, oh, I'm not going to give up happiness. No, you're setting up different goals for happiness. Happiness under having happiness by meeting a friend, happiness by, realizing your own societal goals is not inferior to, the happiness of having a child. But instead, what it is, it's a more realistic approach to the society that we live in. And we believe that more achievable happiness, it simply means more potential happiness. That's why we are so proposed. And that is why we burdens are unfair on the current society. Thank you.
Right, thank you, government reply, for that fine speech. That concludes this debate. I will be trying to organize my oral adjudication and come back. I think we can have a brief break until then. I'll try to be back by 4:40. So I think we can have like 15-minute break. Meanwhile, for those of you who have been like observing this debate, if you have any team that you think won the round, you can send the result, like your own result, to Suhyun in her private chat, not to me. Yeah, you can send it to Suhyun, who currently has her camera on. Yeah, so yeah, that's that. Yeah, I'll be back. Please make sure to be back by 4:40. Thank you. Right, so I'm gonna have three parts in my oral adjudication. First, I'm gonna give some general impressions of the debate, and then I'm going to announce who I gave the win to, and lastly, I'm gonna justify that result. All right, so firstly, I think that there are two main observations that I felt for both government and opposition team, which is that firstly, I think that there were a lot of different areas of the benefits that both teams were trying to achieve at the end of the day. Like for example, like good relationships, like for example, personal development, economic mobility, financial stability, etc. So I think that when there are different benefits or different values that you wish to aspire for, I think that there needs to be certain level of explanation as to why the goal that you wish to achieve at the end of the day is the most important piece of the material in the debate. So when both teams are wanting different achievements, then that means that for judges, there needs to be certain level of analysis as to why that value is the utmost priority or needs to be prioritized above all. But I think that that was a bit missing, and I think that's probably the reason why this debate was a very close debate. I think secondly, and I think like when you listen to the debate overall, you might have noticed at one certain point that debaters were talking about why certain benefits are possible to happen in like either case scenario, but there was a bit of a lacking explanation as to why that benefit is likely or why that benefit is probable. So what I mean by that is that when you want to like in debate, like when you want to say that certain benefits you wish to achieve certain benefits, and when you're able to achieve the benefit that has impact XYZ, I think that at the very same breath, it's better in terms of the debate strategy to have an explanation as to why it's likely that you will be able to achieve those kind of aspired benefits at the end of the day. I think when these kind of explanations are not substantiated to its fullest extent, then even if you have a very good content, you might not be able to win the debate because of the strategies that you employed during the round, right? So I thought, again, this was a very close round, and I really had fun judging this round because it was very interesting, the materials that were being discussed. But I gave a slight upper hand to government side for following reasons. So I thought there were mainly two major clashes that I identified. First is on the idea of relationship and personal benefits or personal development that you're able to accrue as a result of that particular relationship. Secondly, and on the idea of economic benefits and social mobility. So firstly, on the idea of relationships. So on the idea of like romantic relationship, particularly like your like dating or like your family, whatnot, coming from prime minister from the very start, there was a lot of structural analysis as to why like for example, the existence of gender norms. For example, in order for you to opt into a relationship, you need to be attractive or you need to have certain level of traits that the society demands, especially Korea. And if you opt into a relationship, then there are constant follow-up expectations, like for example, when you're going to have child, and like you need to educate your child in a decent way, or for example, you're going to have like, you know, parents-in-law that constantly tries to interfere in these kind of external pressures and external validations that you are required to fulfill in that regard. I think that what this, and this was like repeated in the Deputy and Gulf Whip speech as well. So what this analysis necessarily proves in the debate, or how it functions in the debate, is that it proves, number one, that it's very hard to achieve meaningful level of relationship. But number two, even if you manage to achieve relationship, the quality of relationship cannot be automatically guaranteed because there are so many other external factors that get into that way. To which the opposition side like response, that number one from leader of opposition speech, that that kind of relationship is very toxic, and obviously not every relationship is as toxic as government side describes, and there are obviously going to be different nature of relationship, and there are going to be very like diverse forms of relationships. While I do understand the direction of this response or direction of this viewpoint, I think that it was a bit dismissive of the substantiated level of analysis that comes from government. So just to merely suggest that these examples as a collective is toxic relationship doesn't fundamentally disprove government's premise that these kind of relationships are more likely because of the current societal condition of South Korea. So I think that that analysis was a bit insufficient to like fully take down the prime minister's material on why the quality of the relationship will be not necessarily as meaningful as it sounds as to be. And I think there was a slight concession coming from Deputy Leader of Opposition speech that financial capacity and economic status are oftentimes some things that are very well taken into consideration when it comes to marriage partner and whatnot, which goes to like make these analysis coming from the prime minister or Gulf bench as an entirety still stand that there are going to be expectation, which means that it's not always easy to have a good functioning relationship. So the reason why I think that this was very important in this debate is because if I look at a lot of opposition's material with regards to the relationship, especially leader of opposition speech, how like, you know, you need to have romantic relationship because you're able to feel certain level of intimacy. You need to like opt into relationship because this gives you certain level of comfort, and like romantic relationship is good because you're able to autonomously choose that relationship, etc. Was hinged on the idea that number one, you are likely to find relationship in the first place, and secondly, your relationship will not be toxic. But I think that insofar as government's analysis still stands, I think it was a bit like it undermined basically the opposition's material with regards to the entire benefit of relationship with regards to its feasibility. So sure, relationship might be good, but I don't think opposition side was able to explain why that good relationship is able to be achieved on their side at the end of the day. I think on that matter, there was a sub-comparison with regards to the clash of relationship in terms of like friends versus romantic relationship. And I think this was a bit of a fair comparison because coming from government whip especially, there was an explanation that friends and romantic relationships are oftentimes mutually exclusive in a sense that you have to spend like your time, you need to spend certain level of like capitals or energy with regard exclusively oftentimes to romantic relationship, especially when you have family, you don't have enough time to spend like spare with for your friends and whatnot. I think that that was where I was able to see that there's maybe not like a very strict, rigid level of mutual exclusivity, but to a certain extent, you need to trade off the time that you want to spend with your family, like friends, when you want to like have a romantic relationship. I think that on that comparison, what opposition side tells me is that, you know what, you're able to autonomously choose your relationship, and this like oftentimes romantic relationship is the place where you're able to feel the most intimate level of like affection. I think, however, number one, I mean, intuitively speaking, yes, like romantic relationship has the greatest extent of intimacy, but I wasn't able to see the very direct link between that intimacy that you're able to feel within your romantic relationship directly to your personal development. The nuance that I get from opposition is that, you know, you are able to like know what you want, and like having certain social interaction allows you to self-actualize. I think, however, coming from government, they meaningfully try to neutralize this by saying that, look, these things can still happen when you have other forms of relationships like friends and whatnot. And in fact, like, you know, you can be more autonomous because you don't rely on other individuals and whatnot. I think, however, this was a bit like uncomparative, because like government side also doesn't explain why like autonomy is better guaranteed on your side, because when you say like friends you are able to opt out, why the same ability to opt out doesn't exist in a romantic relationship. So like on the idea of on which type of relationship are you better able to have autonomy, it was a bit of a wash at the end of the day. But I think that what the comparison, the weighing that I got from GovWhip was that, you know, but it's at least easier to find a meaningful level of relationship rather than meaningful level of romantic relationship, which was also like flagged out in Deputy Prime Minister's speech when the PM talks about how there are minimum requirements that you are expected to fulfill in romantic relationships more often than not, and that expectations exist to a larger extent in romantic relationship compared to other forms of relationships. I think that that was a point where I was able to see, even if I give certain level of benefit of the doubt to government, that romantic relationships are qualitatively better than friend relationships or other forms of relationship, so long as that was neutralized or mitigated by Gov. And then Gov goes on to say that it's easier to find friends rather than romantic relationship, was where I was able to see that maybe on that clash of which side has a better level of social interaction, Gov has a slight upper hand. Talking next about then the second clash with regards to the economic benefit and social mobility. So the main claim that I get from opposition, and substantially from Deputy Leader of Opposition specifically, is this idea that, you know, you're likely to be lazy because, you know, because you're afraid to achieve all of these like having family, like, you know, educating your children. Oftentimes educating your children is the biggest incentive for you to want to earn a lot of money or be financially stable and whatnot. But the point of which you no longer have that level of interaction, level of like incentive, is a point where you're likely to turn a bit complacent or like lazy. And like basically that also means that the harm of reaching at least near to that goal also don't exist. Like, you know, when you aim for 10, you at least get 8, but the point of which you don't aim for 10, then you're not likely to even get 8. I think that level of the analysis was very well substantiated, and it was very well structured in a way that I was able to give credit. But I think that the reason why this wasn't able to give opposition side win in this debate particularly is because I think, coming from government, they do meaningfully tell me that, you know, but other levels of the incentive would exist. Like, for example, like you might still want to go on a vacation, and therefore you want to earn money because you want to go to like rich countries, which means that going on a vacation to these countries require a lot of money. You might want to opt into your hobby. Other forms of like incentive would still exist. And at that point, what I was able to see is that perhaps government side doesn't have more powerful incentive than opposition, but at least there's some level of similar degree of incentives or similar degree of motivation that exists in both government and opposition with regards to, you know, pushing for individuals to work harder. But even if I give the benefit of the doubt to opposition, that people will work harder on opposition because, you know, these goals are very big, and like, you know, maybe like, you know, wanting to buy a house, especially in Korea, like costs more than maybe like opting into your hobby. So the level of incentive is very like substantially larger in government in opposition. Even if I do like understand that to be true, I think that what government like prime minister especially again and deputy prime minister preempts is that just because you try doesn't mean that you always succeed, right? And at that point, that means that the standing benefit of opposition, in my evaluation, is that you are at least likely to get near to that. But at that point, that I wasn't able to see the comparative advantage that opposition is able to have. That if incentive exists like similarly on both worlds, presumably a bit larger in opposition. But if you're not able to fully materialize the attempted gaining that you wanted to achieve at the end of the day, that presumably means that the end outcome isn't very meaningfully different in opposition. Whereas government does tell me that even if the end achievement that you aim for is not as great, at least it's more likely, but not like at least it's more likely because now you're able to reallocate your focus into things that are more proximate, the point of which you don't focus on unrealistic goal of like having family and educating your children very well. But I think also what government side tells me is that you're able to at least use that money for yourself. Like you no longer have to spend your life saving into things like educating your children or for other people. You're able to spend that for yourself, spend for your own hobby and whatnot. Personally, I was able to, I mean, intuitively, like, or like spending money for yourself sounds nice, but I think this point was a bit undersubstantiated in the government side as well, because like I wasn't sure why spending money for yourself is a innate or automatic benefit in itself, but I think it wasn't really like challenged by the opposition, so it was there, and that's that. So I think on that point of economic mobility or social mobility, perhaps like both sides has might accrue that to a similar extent, but I think that if you look at the essence of that mobility, because government side does give a framing with regards to at least you use that to yourself, I think perhaps, and which by the way again wasn't challenged by op, I think perhaps this was a bit like almost a wash or slightly too gov. I also think that there was an analysis which was a bit underclashed or under discussed further, which was the idea of political pressure that you're able to exert to a government or society when the generation as a collective refuses to engage in actions or activities that the society think is very significant, is a point where the government or is a point where youth as an entirety is able to push for this narrative that getting job or getting employed or getting like married, these things are very hard, and therefore that's the reason why youth is as a collective like giving up on this issue. And that means that government now has an incentive to care and change the structure. Was perhaps certain level of aftermath that government does put forward, but it was very underclashed, so it wasn't the decisive factor of this debate. But I think that still, because of the remaining reasons that I already told you, I think I gave again the slight upper hand to government. Yeah, so that's my oral adjudication or my observation of the debate. Yeah, so again, thank you for the debaters who came and presented a demo debate for the new members of KIDA. I think this might have been a very interesting and very informative, exemplary debate for everyone. Yeah, I think Suhyun can now introduce or move on to the next lecture part. Oh. Hi, do you guys see the screen? All right, I think yeah, I think the screen is visible. Just a sec. All right, so moving on to the last part of this orientation, which is lecture delivered by Sarah Yun. Yeah, so we have Sarah Yun from KUDC/SNU as our guest lecturer today. She has a very extensive achievements, such as doing the chief adjudicator for the 2021 World Debate Open Chinese University Debating Championship, 2020 Monash Australs, which is the biggest intervarsity debate tournament in the Australasia, and 2019 Northeast Asia Debating Championship, as well as being the best judge of 2019 Spring KNC. She was also NEDC finalist for 3 times and the overall best speaker. And she was the champion for the Spring KNC 2018 and Gyeonggi International Affairs Tournament. And like very long list of achievements. She also is an alumni of KIDA at this point. She has developed a very astonishing career after graduating, or yeah. So I think she will be delivering a very informative and helpful lectures, especially for those newly entered debaters who are like freshmen who want to see how they can use debate activity to like develop themselves or like have a meaningful experience out of it. So the theme for the lecture is basically going to be how to approach debate motions and how to utilize debating in your career by Sarah. I will now invite Sarah to the floor. Yeah.
Cool. Would you allow me to share the screen here, if that's okay? Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think you can share right now. Can you try?
Let's see. Can you see the EBT?
Yes, we can. 너가 볼 수 있다고 말해줘.
Yes, we can just like Wi-Fi is cut, but yeah, we're good.
If many of you, okay, are you gonna record or what? Make up your mind. But anyway,
yeah, we're recording.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, hopefully I would like it to be an interactive lecture, and I'm going to be asking a lot of questions as I go through. So I would very much appreciate it if some of you and many of you be able to turn on your screen or turn on your video, and so that I can see who's talking when I ask those questions, but also feel free not to. I like talking, so I would probably just answer my own questions, and that's perfectly fine too. But I would very much appreciate if we can make this as engaging as possible. So yeah, so let's get started. So welcome to the KIDA orientation lecture. I've heard that I am given 1 hour for this lecture with about 10 minutes or 5 minutes of Q&A session at the back. I have 2 parts for this. First, I'm going to talk about debate stuff. And for part 2, I'm going to talk about my career stuff. Right now, I am currently working as a consultant at the World Bank. I started working around last February 2021. And until now, I am currently working along with my grad school right now at Seoul National University, where I'm doing my master's degree in international commerce. So hopefully I get some opportunity to talk about those things. I know that I am very old and a lot of these things will only matter to you at some much later point in your life, but hopefully I am able to give you some guiding points as to how those things will be able to be relevant to your eventual career through or after your time at KIDA or debate. So yeah, let's make this fun, hopefully. And feel free to ask me and shoot me any questions as I go through. I like to make this as engaging and interactive as possible. So stop me at any point that you would like to. And I also have a memo pad open here, just in case it would be a lot more helpful for us to do notes as we go. Okay, cool. So let's begin. All right, so the first part that I'm going to talk about, I have been asked to talk about motion analysis and how it is that we're able to approach different motions. So as you would probably know, and if not, that's perfectly fine as well. In debate, we have what's called policy debate and value debate, and those are the 2 large chunks or categories of motions that we have. Would anybody be able to tell me what is the difference between policy and value debate, or policy motions or value motions? And if it's not rookies, also Youngwoo and Soyeon, feel free to chip in and tell me your inputs that you might have. But yeah, anybody have an idea of what the difference between these two would be? You can raise hand or just turn on your mic and then go ahead, whichever works for you. No one?
I'm actually just a rookie, so it's
Sure,
just my
yeah.
assumption.
Mhm.
I believe that a policy motion will be about whether a house should adopt certain policy or not, while the value motion is more about subjective values and morality, such as right or wrong or desirable or undesirable.
Okay, very good, right? I think, should I call you Ihyun?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think Ian basically knocked off on the very right points as to what is the main difference between policy and value motions. So as Ian said, policy motions are basically when we think about whether a motion is a good solution to a particular problem, because essentially every motion that we do in debates is some solution to some problem. And the purpose of the debate is to figure out whether evaluate, and to eventually determine whether we think a particular motion is the right solution to the right problem. Okay, so policy debates, we often consider those aspects, and we would often say that policy debates are the most common motion types that you probably encounter in debate. So policy debate, motion types, we have this house would, this house believes that, and then we also have actor debates, which is like as A, this house would, B or C or whatever, right? And then for value debates, as Ian already also talked about, this is an ex post valuation of a certain trend, of a certain phenomenon, or anything that the motion suggests, right? It can be a trend phenomenon, but it can be also any other movement that is happening in the status quo. And as you said, we are not saying that we should do it like a policy would lay out, but it's a more of an ex post valuation or evaluation of whether it was a good thing or not, whether it was regrettable or not, or whether it was worthy of celebrating or not. Okay, good. All right, so I have a couple of examples here, which is for the policy debate, we have this house would ban smoking for young adults. And then for the value debate, we have this house regrets the growing trend of young generation smoking. So in those particular examples, is anybody able to tell me how you would be able to differently approach these two motions, although they are under the similar theme of smoking for young adults? Yeah, and I think Ian showed a great example in the beginning when she chipped in with her input. This is a rookie orientation session, so it's perfectly fine if you are wrong. I personally don't think that there is anything like wrong in debates. Like the beauty of debate is subjectivity. So feel free to chip in your answers. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be afraid to be right. So yeah, I would really, be appreciative if you're able to provide your inputs. But if not, that's also super cool. So yeah, would anybody be able to tell me how you would differently approach these two example motions here? So this house would ban smoking for young adults, or this house regrets the growing trend of young generation smoking. Nope. Okay, that's fine. So as for the policy motion, which is this house would ban smoking for young adults, oftentimes we would talk about things like whether this ban is the best policy, right? We would think about questions like, are there other alternative policy? For example, stronger regulations that would probably do a better job. Wait, I will. Okay, I think Laura is a little confused. If anybody can tell Laura what is happening, that'd be great. But anyhow, so yeah, so we would be asking questions like, are there other alternatives like stronger regulations that would be a better replacement to an entire ban? We would also be asking questions like, is the government justified to do this ban? Who does this ban affect the most? What impact does this policy bring to the young people? Is that impact good? And does that impact particularly hurt some people more over others? For example, people who wouldn't be able to afford or people who would be severely affected as a result of this motion or policy, right? So those are the types of things that you would be asking for a policy motion. And then versus that to a value motion in which you would be asking similar but different questions in nature, right? You would be thinking of questions like, what does the growing trend of these young people smoking more mean about the society? Does that say something about the society? Is that a good thing or not? What does the counterfactual necessarily look like? And by counterfactual, I mean, what does the world look like in a world where that trend didn't particularly exist? What does it look like? And is that better than the status quo? Okay, so those would be the different questions that you would be asking for these types of motions. Although they would be talking about a similar theme, you would be asking different points. Okay, very good. All right, so this is basically a copy and paste of what I have for my own checklist. So in my preparation time for AP, it's 30 minutes, and for BP, it's 15 minutes. You wanna make sure that you're maximizing the efficiency of your prep time. You wanna be asking the right questions in preparation for a motion. So I basically have a checklist of all the questions that I want to make sure that I am asking before I prepare for that motion. And some of the questions that I ask are basically here. So the common part, which is the upper part of the slide, is basically the questions that you would ask regardless of the nature of the motion. So for both policy and value debates, you would always be asking questions like, we would often call this contextualization. You would ask questions like, what is the problem? Is it an urgent problem? What does the urgency of that problem necessarily look like? The second part of the question that you would be asking is, what does the problem look like? How does that necessarily manifest in our society? And third is, why does the problem exist? And what are the root causes as to why that problem exists? And I think this kind of root analysis is important, because whether a solution is a good solution or not can many times matter depending on whether you analyze the root source of that problem rightfully or not. Okay, so it's always important that you ask why that problem necessarily exists. And then after you go through those common problems, some of the more specific problem questions that you want to ask under a policy debate are as follows. For example, how does this motion tackle the root causes of the problem, right? Because as I mentioned in the beginning part, a motion is some solution to some problem. So at the end of your case, you always want to be able to answer, so does this motion actually solve the problem that you identified, right? And oftentimes we call that solvency, okay? The degree of how much this motion is able to tackle or address or solve that problem. So you always want to ask that question, how does that motion tackle or address the root causes of the problem? The second question, which I think is extremely important, is questions like, is this motion the only option or the only policy that is available? Or are there other alternatives that were tried or that we can try for the first time? And I think this question is really important, because you would notice when you start doing your own debates that coming up with better alternatives alone might be able to win you some debates. So for example, just a while ago, we talked about the motion, this House would ban smoking. And then if you're an op, the questions that you would be asking the government team is things like, why do we have to ban smoking? If the purpose of this motion is to ensure that we have a healthier society by a decrease in smoking population, then we think the alternative of strengthening the existing regulations is much better. So by giving that alternative, what you're able to do is, one, you are showing that the benefit of the government side is not unique, because you're able to show that the benefit of achieving a healthier society is also achievable on your side, but by an alternative of stronger regulations. But two, you're also showing that by strengthening existing regulations, but not doing a ban, you're not creating the harm on the freedoms that government does. And that's important because you're showing that you can achieve the same benefit without the harms that the government side is bringing by doing this ban. So that's what I mean by coming up with good alternatives alone might sometimes be able to win you these debates. So it's really important that when you're approaching a policy motion, that you're asking whether this motion is the only policy, or as we would call in debates, the unique or exclusive policy that is able to address that problem. So if you're on the government side, trying to say that it is, then other things that you would have to prove is things like why past measures have failed, and therefore why this is the only mechanism or the only policy that would work, and therefore how this is an exclusive solution to this particular problem. If you're the opposition, you would try to be asking during your prep time, do we have other alternatives? And if we don't, are there new alternatives that you would like to propose on the opposition side? And then we call those things counter proposals, right? So I think in policy debates, a lot of your preparation, not too much, but like a good bulk of your time in your preparation time should definitely be, should definitely be dedicated to asking this question of the exclusivity of that motion for both gov and up. And then the third is this: what can this motion do or not do? Because I mentioned earlier that a motion is some solution to some problem. And obviously, just like any other policy that we have in the society, a single policy can't solve everything, right? So when you're preparing for the motion, it is important for you to do what's called setting the parameters, which is basically telling the judge or telling the House that, look, this policy might be able to do A, B, and C, but we are not saying that it's able to also solve everything else like D, F, G, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And what that does is it knocks out or it preempts. Preempting is basically when you predict what opposition is going to say and attack it in advance, like preemption. And what that necessarily does, it prevents the opposition from accusing you of not being able to solve D, F, G, H, I, blah, blah, blah. Right? So setting those parameters and boundaries of what you think this motion can do, but also won't or can't do is also really important when you're approaching these kinds of policy motions. Okay, very good. Any questions so far? Okay, good. And then let's go to value debate. So some of the questions that you would be asking in the value debate are things like Iham pointed out in the beginning, what are some of the harms and benefits of this particular motion? We are not saying whether it is justified that we do this ban or not. We are not talking about the exclusivity of the motion or not, because those are dedicated for policy debates, right? But rather we're asking things like, what is the harm, benefit or cost benefit analysis? And then we're also doing things like, what is the counterfactual? And as I mentioned earlier, what is counterfactual again? Does anybody remember?
Counterfactual can mean an alternative can be better than the proposed idea. So it can prove that the benefits of the motion is not unique to the other team.
Good. And that's a definition for counter proposal. Okay. And that's different from counterfactual. Okay. Counter proposal is basically what Ian just said. Okay. The counter policy, the other thing than the policy. But counterfactual is the world that would have been true if it wasn't for this trend or movement. Okay, so we are taking some token of imagination here. What would the world look like imaginarily? What would that world look like if we didn't have that particular trend? And in this particular, example of the smoking motion, the value example of the smoking motion, it would be like, what would the world look like if we didn't have the growing trend of people or young adults smoking? And is that counterfactual better than the status quo? Okay, so that's the counterfactual. And it is advised that we always try to think about what is the counterfactual for value debates, because you need to compare why you think, especially if you're in the government side that says we regret this thing, we regret that this happened, then it's also advisable for you to prove why you think the world without that regrettable thing would have been like, and why that's better than the status quo. Okay, so those are the questions that you want to ask under a value debate. And then the third one you would ask is, what is the yardstick or metric of evaluating the motion or the trend or the phenomenon? And yardstick or metric is something that I think you guys would definitely come across as you are going through your debate career, which is basically it's like a criteria of what the judge or what the debate should be judged upon. Okay, I think this is a little bit more than what would be covered for a rookie orientation. So go ask your 선배s what yardstick or metric is. Okay, cool. So all right, any questions on the motion analysis so far? Okay, good. So yeah, what's up?
You mentioned about pre-assuming that opposition might say something, and by mentioning some things, we can block the opposition from accusing us. But my question is that in some types of debate, I heard that pre-assuming that the other team would say something and blocking that logic in advance can be accused as being too proactive. And I'd like to have some advices on that. How to distinguish such negative actions.
Okay, that's a good point. So that can potentially be called what's called straw manning or swirling. And that basically means if you're being accused of something that you didn't say, okay, then what's the trick here? That you have to preempt right? That when you're preparing for the motion during your prep time, you should be imagining, or you should be preempting the arguments that are definitely going to be pointed out coming from the opposition, right? So it's intuitive things. So for example, if we're talking about the banning motion a while ago, if you're on the government side that is trying to think about what the opposition side is going to say for this House would ban smoking motion, then obviously opposition is definitely going to talk about things like freedoms of smokers. They're definitely going to talk about why alternatives like strengthening regulations is a much better policy to do. Those things are very much predictable, but also reasonably true things that they're definitely likely to say, right? So I think the trick is to make the right balance between trying to tackle and preempt the right things as opposed to straw manning. Okay, good. So that's a good point. All right, so the next part that I'm going to talk about is basically tips for rookie debaters. I have been debating for a really long time before 2018, and then most of the other time after that, I've been judging many tournaments. And I notice a lot of things that debaters do. It's just the benefit of the hindsight, right? When you're judging or evaluating a debate, the things that they do erroneously just seem a lot clearer than when you're actually doing it yourself as a debater. And these are things that I also learned while I was doing my own speaking and debating during my time, but also things that became a lot more clearer over time as I was judging more debates. And these are therefore the tips that I would like to advise to rookie debaters, and something that I also picked up along the way. And hopefully these things become helpful to your own preparation for your time in KIDA or debate. And just a disclaimer that obviously these things are just guiding points, and these are reference points that are subjectively true for me, but it can also not necessarily be always true at all times, okay? And you can definitely come up with a list of your own tips that would be more relevant to you. But anyhow, so having said that, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is active engagement. And I think we have already kind of dealt with that. And by active engagement, I don't just mean rebuttals, right? So rebuttals and POIs are definitely other methods and mechanisms of active engagement that you would be doing. But I think what is actually good and meaningful engagement is preemption, like everything that we just talked about until now, right? Build your arguments in anticipation of what the opposing team will say. That will save you a lot of time, and that is also going to make sure that the arguments and the case construction that you make is going to be very much relevant and something that addresses and engages with the stuff that the opposition team or the opposing team is going to say. Okay, I'm going to try to ask you another example in which, in this case, is this House would allow corporations to choose the rates of minimum wage for its workers. By the way, a lot of the motion examples that I am giving for this lecture are purposely very much simplified, so they wouldn't necessarily be good motions for actual debates, but they have been just made for educational purposes. So a disclaimer there. But anyway, so let's say that the motion is this House would allow corporations to choose the rates of minimum wage for its workers. So if you're on the government side, what is the main idea or main principle that you would push for here? What would be the main thing that you would talk about with your teammates during your prep time?
If I were the government, then I believe we can depend on the economic principle, because corporations are economic entity whom by constitution they have the freedom to choose their policies the way they want.
Perfect. Okay, very good. The first thing that you would definitely talk about on the government side, or the main principle that you would push for, is the idea of corporate freedom, right? The idea of corporate choice and how these things are, ingrained into the Constitution, and why corporations have the right to choose for themselves and why the corporations have the right to freedom. Very good. So the main point here is freedom. Okay, good. Now, if on the government side, if you push for that idea of freedom, just the way that I and Ihyun just did, opposition will obviously rebut to that by saying, look, freedoms are not absolute in a democratic society, right? Freedoms can always be curtailed and they can always be limited if they are creating certain third-party harms to the individuals. And then they would talk about why allowing these corporations to choose these minimum wage rates would incur serious harms that would be good justification why we should limit the freedoms of corporations, correct? Okay, so the opposition is obviously going to say that, right? And the tip here is, in your prep time, you know the opposition is going to make a, tackling point on that idea of freedom itself. Then the trick here is that during your prep time, when you're building this argument, and that doesn't mean that you have to scrap and get rid of this freedom argument. The trick here is that you should be building this argument of freedom in a way that better deals with what the opposition is obviously going to say. Okay, and there are numerous ways in which you would be able to say that, right? Any ideas on how that would look like? Okay, the first one. Yeah, sure, go for it.
Like for me, I might state that depriving corporations of the freedom to decide their own minimum wages will lead to a dangerous slippery slope within the society, in which every single action of economic entity can be monitored and controlled by the government.
Is that upcase? That's upcase, right? So that's what opposition side would say, right? Slippery slope, why this is bad?
No. I'm saying that government would say that if opposition points out that it's freedom of the corporation still needs to be restricted.
Mm-hmm. Right. So opposition side would say that freedom should be restricted.
Yes, and government would say what I just said, because restriction of freedom in such way can lead to even greater restriction of freedom in the future. So it can serve as an exemplary.
Okay, so how it's going to create like black markets and how it's going to create even worse harms if you limit these freedoms.
Yes, that can work too.
Okay. All right, so that's one point. That's definitely one mechanism in which we would be able to preempt that, all right? And in addition to that, other ways that I thought about was things like, because you want to point out that if the opposition side says that freedoms are limited in a democratic society when there are third-party harms that arise as a result of that freedom, then on the government side, you would want to build an argument that talks about why then this freedom to corporations is going to actually create benefits and therefore knocking out their harm principle. Okay, so there you would talk about, for example, you would note that freedoms are limited when there arise the harms, as opposition said. Then you would prove why this choice is actually beneficial for the workers, or why this is actually beneficial for the society as a whole, right? You would talk about why, allowing these corporations to choose for themselves is more fitting for the corporations, and these minimum wages would be more relevant and working for the workers. There would be greater employment of people since corporations feel more comfortable with these minimum wages. The point here is that, in addition to saying that freedom is important, you would talk about, as an additional layer, why this freedom actually creates benefits that are actually good for the society and also good for the workers. And therefore, if you're saying that this freedom actually creates benefits, then even if opposition later says that this creates harms, you can say why this also creates benefits that are able to cancel out those harms. Right? So that's the way that you would additionally build your freedom argument from the very beginning, so that opposition isn't able to tackle you on that from, for example, Elo's speech, okay? Another way that you would be able to do that is, for example, talk about how corporations are doing a lot of good things already for the society, okay? You would talk about how corporations are doing things like pollution controls, they're already paying for corporate tax, they're doing a lot of things called corporate social responsibility. And the point here, again, is to cancel out the harms that the opposition side would say. So you would say, look, We understand that this freedom itself may create certain harms, but the corporation right now is already doing a lot of great things and beneficial things for the society that are able to compensate for the potential harms that might arise. So the point here is that you're building these arguments in anticipation of what the opposing team would say. And that makes your arguments a lot more sophisticated, a lot more complex, and a lot more engaging to what the opposing side is going to say. So that's what I mean by active engagement. Okay, very good. And then let's move over to the second tip, which is characterization, okay? Often debates are all about characterization of the specific stakeholders or the situations or the world or the landscape that you're talking about. But I think a rookie mistake that I often see coming from debaters is when they often rely on characterizations that are good for them, but are also extreme, okay? So for example, you would say things like, I brought out some examples like religion, feminism, corporations, and developing countries, okay? So oftentimes many debaters would talk about how religious people or religious organizations are all very extreme, all very dogmatic, all very racist and sexist. And that might help their case because you're painting a bad picture of, religious organizations or religious people. But it's not a fair characterization because it's not a realistic or likely characterization of the real world, okay? The same thing with corporations. They might say that all corporations are very evil, they're all exploitive and manipulative. It's true in extreme cases, but not necessarily true in most cases, right? Developing countries, they would say they're completely poor, they're completely unable to do certain things. That's true in cases like Somalia or like sub-Saharan Africa, where developing countries are very poor. But there are also a full host of other countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, and other countries, other countries in Africa that are doing very well, even though they still have the developing country status, right? So the point here for characterization is to utilize the argument of spectrum. Okay, everything in the world happens on a spectrum. That means there are things that would be obviously very, extreme on the opposite sides of the spectrum. But the more realistic characterization that you want to draw is where people usually stand on the spectrum, right? On the mid ground, right? So the point in the debate is to provide what is the more likely and what is a more realistic characterization of the stakeholders for the world and stakeholders or the world. And that would give you a lot of advantage in making sure that you get the points from the judge for providing a more realistic characterization of what the real world looks like. Okay, very good. And another thing that I just want to briefly talk about here is probability versus possibility. Can anybody tell me what might be the difference between these two? Okay, so possibility basically means that certain things can happen. It's 50-50, right? It can happen or it doesn't happen. But probability is the likeliness of that possibility being true. Okay, I think a lot of debaters spend a lot of time trying to prove why certain things would possibly happen, but they don't necessarily tell us why certain things would probably happen. And I think one of my favorite arguments in debate is telling judges why there is a clear difference between possibility and probability, and how the opposing side has probably proven why A is possible, but they didn't prove why it is necessarily probable. And then we would say, but our team gave you a more realistic picture of what is likely to happen. Okay, so debate is all about that kind of framing of where the mid ground is or what the realistic picture is. Okay, so take note of that second tip. The third one is called premises or assumptions. Does anybody know what a premise is?
It's basically a condition which you think that this is true, and then you build some kind of arguments up in that premise.
Very good. Okay, good. So premise in Korean is 전제, right? It's the idea that has to be true for every other thing that is built on top of it to also be true, right? So if premise is false, then a lot of the other arguments that are contingent or laid on top of that premise would be untrue. Okay, and I think this is really important to catch what certain premises or faulty assumptions are of the opposing side, because the essence of this is that there is no need to rebut against every single argument insofar as you're able to recognize what the faulty premise is and break that base. And all the arguments that are built on top of that would fall similarly. Okay, and I think a good example of that is this House supports America's democratization efforts. If you're in the Gov, you would, probably talk about things like why democracy is good, right? You would talk about how democracies provide free elections, they give freedom of speech, they talk about, the benefit of representation and all of that. And then if you're on the opposing side, we have limited time in debates, right? If you're on the opposing side, you don't have to rebut against every little benefit that they talk about democracy, right? Rather, if you're able to catch the premise and break down government's premise that all the arguments or all the benefits of democracy that they talk about are contingent upon the premise that these democracies are functional, right? That they work. But if we're able to prove, coming from the opposing side, that not all democracies work, that democracies are different from theory to practice, and maybe give some examples of like Afghanistan or many of the, MENA countries, the Middle East and North African countries, where democracy tried to be built, but eventually failed, right? So if you're able to prove, or rather disprove, the premise that the benefits of democracy may be true, but these benefits are contingent on the premise that these democracies are well built and that they are well implemented. So if you're able to prove that it is very difficult to build a good democracy, especially in non-democratic countries, then all of the other benefits that they talk about democracy would naturally fall along with that premise. Does that make sense? Very good. Okay, so the point here is that you don't have to always rebut against every single argument. And I think it is always a good tip to try to look out for what is the premise of their argument. And once you bite onto the premise, you're giving too much credit to a lot of the other arguments and benefits that are corollarily true. Okay, so it is really important that you try to catch what the premise is and try to break the base upon which their other arguments are laid upon. Okay, good. Any questions here so far? Perfect. So let's move on to the next part, which is just two more things. The first one is comparisons and trade-offs, okay? Does anybody know what a trade-off is?
I believe the trade-off is when two things are mutually exclusive. So you need to give up one thing by choosing the other.
Very good, right? It's where in which you're able to give up something in gain of the other. Okay, very good. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. I just want to quickly go over the comparative points here. So, in debates, it's all about comparatives, right? So, government side can build all these great arguments, but if they're not comparative with the other side, it is very difficult for you to win, and vice versa. So some of the questions that you want to be asking for comparisons is things like, what is their best case scenario, but why is it still worse than our team? Here you're giving what's called the benefit of the doubt. What if every great thing that they're saying is true? Why is it still not as good as ours, right? And the second thing is the flip of that. What is our worst case scenario, but why is it still better than the opposing team? Okay, so those are some of the questions that you want to be asking. And the point here is that we often prematurely assume that our opposing team is always wrong. Okay, and the essence then here is assume that they're right. Okay, give them the benefit of the doubt that they might be right, and then prove why then they're still bad, why they're still not as good as our side. Okay, and this is a huge rookie mistake, or I would say, or a lack of strategy that many debaters do, that oftentimes, every time a debate team says something, they would say, no, that's not true, and then they would give their own reasons. But what I would advise is always at the last layer of your rebuttal, try to add an even if, right? That even if they're right, even if we give them the benefit of the doubt, why is it still a bad thing? Okay, so that's the point of comparisons and why comparisons is important. And now let's move over to this idea of trade-offs. Okay, so trade-off, like what Ian said, is in which you give up one thing in order to gain another. And this is really important because another rookie mistake, something that I did for a very long time until a very mature stage of my debate career, is that I always felt like I had to prove and win every clash or win every argument or win every principle, okay? But in debates, in good debates, you don't have to do that. Insofar as you're able to prove why the thing that you're giving up is justified, then it's fine. And so the point here, for example, let's do an example just to clarify the point. Okay, so let's say that the motion is this House would legalize the sale of human organs. If you're on the Gov side, what would you say? Or what is the main thing that you would probably say?
If our government, I'd say it can bring about more chances of survival for people who really need organs.
Very good. So it says it saved lives.
Yes.
Right. What would op most likely to say?
That you cannot trade humans' body parts just because you need some money and just because like whatever.
Very good, right? And then we often call it human dignity, right? 인간의 존엄성, right? And here, the point here is that Gov doesn't have to try so hard to prove to the fullest extent why this legalization also takes opposition's benefit of human dignity, right? Rather, you would say, or you could say that insofar as we are saving more lives, then we're willing to trade off the benefit of the opposition side, which is human dignity. And then the trick here is to try to minimize that thing that you're trying to trade off, right? So make it seem like the thing that you're saving is big and important, but try to minimize the importance of the thing that you are trading off. So for example, you would say, again, that as long as we're saving more lives, we're willing to trade off human dignity. And you would say things like human dignity is a very abstract concept that is subjective, and compare that to the actual tangibility of the benefit, which is saving real people's and real humans' lives, right? So in that way, you're trading off something, but you're also further justifying why that trade-off is okay. Okay, very good. And I think this trading off trick is really important because it saves you a lot of time. Rather than thinking about proving every point or having to take every clash, the point is to strategically evaluate what is the most overriding principle in your debate, and then think about whether a benefit that may be true on the opposite side is something that we're willing to trade off. Okay, very good. So comparisons and trade-offs are super, super important. Always ask, what if the opposing side were right? And this is where the trade-off side becomes really important, or the even if analysis, right? Because you could say, look, opposition side's benefit of human dignity is true, and it is important, but we are still willing to trade off. And that's easy and strategic, right? Very good. Cool. And then let's move over to the last tip that we have here, which is framing. Okay. So framing is basically the idea that you want to paint a picture of the world. You want to make it just sound very convincing. And oftentimes framing is associated with the manner aspect of debate speeches. And you have to remember that judges are humans too. They have emotions. So add imagery, add urgency, pull some strings, move hearts. That's important. Okay, so a quick example that I would give here is this House as the West would engage in a military intervention in Ukraine against Russia. There are many, many things that you could say on the Gov side, right? You could talk about why there are ample Western geopolitical incentives and why there are ample geopolitical interests in the military intervention, why it's very likely that the West will succeed against Russia's invasion, all those things. It would also talk about why democracy and sovereignty are important ideals for the West and all that. Those are definitely great points. But I think when you're framing the debate, I think other things that you could talk about is you talk about the women and children in hospitals who are being killed. You talk about innocent civilians who are on their road to like refugee sites being bombed into pieces. You talk about Ukrainian and Russian soldiers who are being cut off from their entire families and without a will to fight for a cause that they simply don't know of, or for a cause that is already lost. Right. So the point here is that in addition to the dry arguments, which are true, the dry arguments that you're selling, it is also advisable for you to sell emotions, right? Add imagery to it, add emotions to it, paint the picture, and that is a part of important framing. And remember that judges are humans too. They also get moved by this kind of framing in debates. Okay, very good. So those are the things that I have prepared for part 1 of the lecture, and the part 2 is just going to be very brief. Does anybody have any questions regarding any of the, structures or any of the tips that I have shared with you so far? Any clarities that you would appreciate? Let's go over those before we move over to the next part. Okay, great.
I have a question. Could you please elaborate a bit more on how to weigh between the two clashing values? For example, you mentioned that the human dignity and human life can be weighed in terms of tangibility or realisticness, but some other values are more difficult to weigh against. So I wonder how that can happen.
So the only answer that I can give you right now is that would obviously be debate by debate. So there are many different ways in which you would be able to weigh things, right? And the way that we just did right now was by the tangibility of the harms. In other debates, it can be about the likeliness of that benefit or harm to be true. And what you just said right now is yardstick or metric, right? Which you should definitely be asking yourself after this. But the point is, it is the metric in which you're weighing. It can be tangibility, it can be the likeliness of realization. There are many different things. And all I can say for now is that it depends debate by debate. Yeah, but those are some standards, not all, but it's not every standard. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Any other question?
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Is it okay if you share the slides after so that we can look at it?
Yeah, of course, no problem. Okay, so for these other 2 questions that are in the chat, I'll go over them after the lecture, just in the interest of making sure that I finish in time. And those who have extra questions can stay behind and we can chat a little bit more. But let me just move over to the next question, and then the other more complex ones, I'll address them afterwards. Okay, cool. So let's go over to our part 2, where I'm going to talk a little bit about career stuff. Okay, so I have been specifically asked by the KIDA Secretariat to kind of talk about how it is that you can make debate career and judging career relevant to your real career in the real world, right? So I'm going to be talking a lot of some of that and some important parts. But anyway, this is just a very quick overview of some of the positions that I've held since 2016. You can see that a lot of them are international organizations or research institutes, both public and private. But right now, as I said, I am working at the World Bank as a consultant. And a lot of the things I'm going to say in the next few minutes is going to be relevant for the first few positions that you would probably vouch for in your career. So it's not like when I was applying for the World Bank, I can't really talk about, oh, I was like Northeast Asia's like blah, blah, blah. It's not like that. Rather, when you're going for entry-level jobs in the early stage of your career, a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about might be helpful. But in the latter part, you would have had good enough positions to build other interpersonal skills that would be more relevant for the future positions. So just take note of that. A lot of the things that I will talk about would be relevant for the early stage and the entry-level positions. Okay, so making debate relevant to your career. I think one of the most important things that debate is able to give you, other than speaking and judging skills, is the ability for organization and administration. And I think this comes in the forms of being a part of organization committees for debate competitions, whether that's domestic or international, organizing debate workshops, or even organizing regular sessions for your debate clubs or whatnot, right? I think it is very, very rare that young students of your age, not my age, but young students of your age have the experience of having organized international level events and international level series of tournaments, right? With more than 100 plus participants from many different countries. I think that is a huge merit and a huge benefit that many, many companies and organizations are super, super interested in. And this is an empirical evidence that when I was applying to the United Nations Development Program, one of the things that my colleagues eventually told me post acceptance was that they were really impressed by the fact that at the age of like 23 that I was at the time, that I had this kind of experience of, organization and administration over international level tournaments with so many participants, right? Because a lot of these companies and organizations are also going to have responsibilities over event organization, whether that be learning sessions, webinars, workshops, whatnot, right? So I think it is really important that you're able to link your organizational and administrative skills that you gain from KIDA or debate into your eventual skill sets, right? And those would specifically be called planning and development, event organization, and partnership coordination. So this is this is an actual extract that I got from my cover letter that I submitted to the World Bank when I was applying for an internship in the beginning. So you can see here, you can see here how I framed what I had in line with what the World Bank was seeking. So I wrote, in regard to my admin and organization abilities throughout universities, I have supervised and led more than 30 different organizing committees or working groups of various sizes, in addition to executing numerous leadership positions. In this process, in addition to managing a great deal of independent research for each working group, I've internalized the importance of taking initiatives, planning and operating workshops and relevant projects, and coordinating coherent and consistent communication with other departments to derive the aspired outcomes. I believe that these skill sets will be apt for this position's primary tasks in providing A, B, and C. So the point here is that you're utilizing a lot of these organizational and administrative skills that you would get out from debate particularly, right? And I also know that when you're in the mid of your debating career, debating is more fun, judging is more fun, but I think it is definitely worth a chance to give non-debate or non-judge positions an opportunity too. They will definitely come back as great merits later in time when you're applying for positions. The second thing that I'm going to talk about is public speaking. And obviously they would be framed under critical thinking, logical reasoning, and public communication. And companies and organizations, especially if you're, for example, applying to like consulting jobs or like consulting firms, they're very, very interested in your ability to put together arguments and put together logic for a specific purpose, right? So those things you would definitely be able to leverage, or those things you would definitely be able to maximize, because debate is all about public speaking. You're speaking in front of like many, many people, and that's a definite merit that many companies and organizations are very interested in. And again, this is something that is an empirical extract from the cover letter that I submitted. You can see that I wrote, I've been consistently involved in activities that require critical thinking, logical reasoning, academic research, and public speaking, which revolved around truly multidisciplinary themes, blah, blah, blah. So the point here is that you're appealing your ability for multidisciplinary thought, which is very much valued in many companies and organizations. Your ability to synthesize different ideas from different themes or different majors or different fields, that is a very big merit and benefit that companies much seek. So it is important that you're able to leverage that. The third thing that I'm going to talk about is youth engagement and leadership. And this is a little bit true in terms of the general trend that many companies and organizations are doing in the status quo. Many of these entities are very interested in youth engagement in their own operations, right? You would see, by example, that international organizations have a whole host of youth-related initiatives. Companies have their own youth-centered programs, youth-centered competitions, 청년 is like a whole thing that is really like, interesting for many companies and organizations. And fortunately, KIDA is all about youth education. It is all about youth leadership and youth empowerment, right? So I think you would definitely be able to leverage your experiences in KIDA, working with the youth, working for the youth, and be able to connect that to other programs that they might be pushing for. So empirically, for example, when I was initially applying for this internship at WFUNA, which is World Federation of United Nations Associations, they were actually recruiting interns for the purpose of operating and developing a youth-centered like a program that was sending kids to the UN and stuff like that. And in that case, my experience actually working with young students, educating them, organizing sessions on behalf of the youth, those things really ended up becoming very meritable in the recruitment process. So those things I think you can definitely leverage, and you can definitely make these things count. And then fourthly, Others, I think these are very intuitive, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those. But debate, speaking well, logical reasoning, critical thinking, these are obviously lifetime skills that would definitely be helpful when you're preparing for interviews, presentations, or public speaking, which are, critical elements in a recruitment process. So those are the things that I think definitely helped me a lot when I was seeking for my relevant positions in my field at the start of my career. And I hopefully hope that a lot of these things also become relevant to you and serve as good enough reference and guiding points when you're also starting off your journey and career. Cool. So those are all that I prepared for today's session. It's 5:55, so let's just swiftly move over to the Q&A sessions. So if you feel that there is a question that is relevant to the whole group, then feel free to ask them now. But other more specific, complex ones, let's go over those a little bit afterwards. Okay, that's super cool. I think that's basically it. So thank you everyone so much for your time, for giving this very, old dinosaur a chance to share my unimportant stories. I hope to be able to cross paths with you in the near future. Feel free to connect with me privately if you have any other questions about career or debate or whatnot. Okay, thank you so much for your time and good luck to all of you in your debate career.
All right. Yeah, just a second. All right, so that concludes today's orientation. Thanks again to Sarah who said yes to my request to come and lecture. It might be a very rare occasion to see Sarah around KIDA these days. Yeah, but anyways, I hope that this was a very informative, not only lecture, but the entire orientation. And I hope that this can be a good chance for you to be develop your interest in KIDA and debating overall, that you will be staying in KIDA and debating or for a long time, because I still think that debating might be a bit stressful in a sense that it's a very competitive activity, but it definitely pays off and you will be able to meet a very good friends and good networks as well. All right, so having all that said, I think if there's no questions or if there's no anything that you want to raise, I think you're welcome to leave the Zoom. Yeah, so yeah, thank you again to everybody for coming to today's orientation. Hope to see you again in the future KIDA events and tournaments as well.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and the two people who asked me questions through chat, feel free to stay behind and I will probably be